All right, I think we're good. Yep, I think everything's set up on my side. Wonderful, wonderful. How we all doing, everybody? I'm excited. We're gonna be checking this one out. I've been waiting for it for quite a while. I'm sorry for missing the last few stream days, by the way. Been a little bit busy with other stuff and didn't expect it to come up, but you know, it is what it is and we are here now. So that's what really matters at the end of the day, don't you think? Well, either way, point is that Smough has come out with a video on Aldrich. It would be the guy named Smough who would tell us about the biggest villain of depravity in Souls, wouldn't he? We needed a resident expert on depravity here. Anyway, but yeah, so Smough wanted to do some Dark Souls 3 stuff, and he actually did reach out to me for this. So I'm actually, kind of involved in this project. Again, he was mostly just, consultation and stuff and providing him research materials, which, as you guys know, I I have no problem with letting people read my website and stuff. So we got the, of course, stuff on the DP and Sully and Guinevere and I guess not Carthagena really, Drang Knights and Rosaria and all stuff related to Aldrich we've already got, and obviously there's so much more here for Dark Souls 3 to cover. So I get the feeling that you know, Smough's had plenty of material to work with in order to make this video. I'm really happy to have, you know, played any, you know, small part in this one. So I'm looking forward to kind of seeing what the end results are. Hey, good to see you there, Adolphus. I'm really happy too, because I feel like, you know, with Elden Ring and stuff, obviously it has surpassed Dark Souls in terms of popularity. Like that's just you know, that's just a fact. But you know, Dark Souls was, you know, kind of defining From Software's brand for the longest time, and you know, now that the trilogy is done and hopefully for good, you know, the series is kind of, you know, falling to the background, right? Like how long has it been since Dark Souls 3's released now? Like 10 years, right? Like we just had the anniversary like a month ago or something. Like we're getting to the point where like soon, you know, there'll be plenty of people who were born when Dark Souls 3 came out that had never played it or heard of it when they're old, and you know, when they're like, you know, 17 or whatever. So like it's not that far off, really. I mean, I'm pretty sure for the original one we're like close to what, 15 years in terms of Dark Souls 1. Like it's coming soon and fast. But like, you know, in the meantime, I'm happy to see like updated lore videos being made. So the fact that Smough, you know, wanted to, you know, cover this project, I think it was related to his, if I recall correctly, his villains video. Like he was, he wanted to cover like the evil figures and stuff, and he wanted to kind of go back and re-examine the lore he understood about those characters and everything. So I'm really happy to see him, you know, use any of my content in pursuit of that. It's a huge honor. Dark Souls is a place of comfort for me to fall back into. It's complex, but not too huge to tackle. I agree. I think that's one of the nice things about Dark Souls. It's obviously not as small as Demon Souls, but it's not as vast as Elden Ring. So it hits that nice middle ground where it's something where you can definitely very easily like absorb and grasp, relatively speaking, and get a full understanding of it. But it's also not so small that, you know, it kind of feels like other areas could have been cooked more, right? Like with Demon Souls, like you would have liked it if maybe there was a bit more definition to some of the countries and stuff outside of the main setting in Boletaria and things like that, you know? So it's like, oh, you know, I'd like to know about more of the countries to the south besides Latria. I would have liked to know more about the countries to the west, besides maybe Mird, or Mirden. No, you don't know Mird. And then there was like, you know, all the other stuff like related to the East and everything, but the East is always going to be kind of enigmatic. So I think it's always fair that all the games kind of try not to focus too hard on like the countries to there. And even then Elden Ring went the extra mile. They focused a lot more on like kind of giving, oh yeah, there's going to be a pseudo India and kind of like a pseudo China, which Dark Souls 3 didn't even really get to tackling until the very end. So like there's a lot, there, you know, there's a lot to like about Dark Souls 3 in terms of just the scale of it. I think it's definitely one of those words that hits just the right sweet spot. Oh my America, Loki on Smough? Is this a dream? I mean, I've worked with Smough in the past, so I can't say that this is like the first time or what have you, but this is the first time in Dark Souls as far as I'm aware. I've worked with him on Bloodborne, and I'm pretty sure I've worked with him on Elden Ring stuff. It's a bit fuzzy to me. Like I said, guys, I'm just the consultant, so like some of the stuff like I send, I give, I share, you know, I get asked questions and things. I don't remember if I've been even referenced in... Actually, no, I can't say that. I definitely have been referenced in his videos in the past before. That I do know, but I don't remember if I've been like, you know, that deeply involved when it came to like the conceptual process. So sorry there. Goldfish memory strikes again. But, you know, after doing a reaction to you know, Hawkshaw's timeline video, and then doing also a reaction to, you know, a completely separate video content for, what was it, the Grand Unified Elden Ring or something like that, you know, kind of getting my my feelings on both of those. I'm happy to be reviewing something from a creator that I have been most familiar with recently, like Smough, you know. All right, so enough of me, you know, enough of me kind of lollygagging. Let me stop our BGM here. Great cover, by the way. And let's get straight to the video. Now, as always, I will be playing it at 2 times speed for just for my sanity, I cannot stand, watching this type of, consuming this type of content at 1.0. So if you want to watch the original, feel free to watch the original and come back to this video live stream later. The VOD will be up obviously publicly soon enough, and you'll be able to watch my reaction separately, or you can just come back to this live stream later. I mean, I don't think the link is going to die on you or anything. Anyway, but until then, please, like, let's try to avoid asking more questions about that. It's how I do things here. So let's get right into it.
The Dark Souls series is no stranger to evil characters.
Ooh.
But when it comes to pure depravity, none are able to outdo Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, whose sludge-like form perfectly reflects his rotten nature. The Man-Eater, the Devourer of Gods, Saint of the Deep. All titles that belong to this vile, yet...
Also, is this loud? Is Smough, quiet/loud enough for you compared to me? I just want to make sure.
Being, who represents a cosmic level threat to the world of Dark Souls.
Uh-huh.
Aldrich was once just a man, but over time, his insatiable gluttony and cannibalism led him to become what he is now, a sentient sludge monster. Worst of all is that Aldrich was a cleric of the Way of White, and was meant to represent morality and piety. Instead, he is a perversion of the faith, and he corrupted the church around him. An entire sub-faith and infrastructure were established to appease Aldrich's never-ending appetite.
Yo, Loki, got the Russian version of Abyssal Archive. Having fun reading it. Wait, the Russian version of AA is out? I'll be honest, Lemmy. I didn't know that was coming out still. I know we were in talks about that years back. I had no idea that was still in production. So I'm happy to hear it. I hope it's good. I can't tell you I vetted the translation, so this is the first I'm hearing of it. But awesome that a Russian version is available for purchase. Anyway,
he was so powerful that he was recruited to be a Lord of Cinder. Upon his reawakening, Aldrich refuses to sit on the throne and has instead pursued his own goals.
If I watch the VOD then on double speed, I can watch Smoughtown's vid on ×4 speed. Knowledge at unprecedented speeds. Yes, assimilated. We are getting to the point where soon it shall just be directly transferred into your brain like a USB stick. Also, Smough's vid needs to be a bit louder. Okay, guys, we're turning it up we're just turning it up a tad.
A pursuit that concludes with his devouring of one of the old gods. While Aldrich is largely driven by his appetites, he also has a grander vision in mind. He has foreseen the age of the deep. It is to this end that he has devoured Gwendolyn, so that he might have the power to usher in this new horrifying era.
I'm really liking this.
Is perhaps the darkest in all of Dark Souls, as he is the example
like
of the
the summary.
All of our greatest evils condensed into a single character. Yet it is a compelling story. He is a foe unlike any other within the world of Dark Souls, a being whose power rivals the gods themselves, and he is a gateway through which we can examine the deep, itself a fascinating cosmic concept. In this lore video, we will not only unpack the lore of Aldrich, but we will also attempt to explain what the deep is, while also discussing Rosaria as she is relevant to both Aldrich and the deep. But before we get started, remember that if you like Dark Souls lore, then consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And if you are interested in additional benefits, such as early access to videos, then consider checking out my Patreon. But before we get started, I just wanted to give a shout out to friend of the channel, Smough, a super talented artist who I've worked with for years, and who did the thumbnail for this very video.
Oh my god, it's a beautiful thumbnail.
Book, Gods and Monsters, a beautifully rendered collector's piece that contains Soulsborne art from across his career, including many thumbnails that he has done for this channel. I own a copy myself, and I can confirm that it is of the highest quality. To clarify, this isn't a paid sponsor. Smough is just an artist I truly admire, and I personally love his new book, and so I just wanted to give it some exposure. If you're interested in picking up a copy of Gods and Monsters, then please check it out at the link below. But with that said, let us get into the story of Aldrich and the deep.
Nice.
However depraved and inhuman Aldrich is by the time we meet him, the truth is that he was once just a human, and as we learn from Hawkwood, he was in fact a cleric who became what he is through his appetite for flesh.
Let's take Aldrich for one, a right and proper cleric, only he developed a habit of devouring men. He ate so many that he bloated like a drowned pig, then softened into sludge, so they stuck him in the cathedral of the deep. And they made him a lord of cinder, not for virtue, but for might.
But a cleric of what? Well, it becomes clear that Aldrich was a member of the Way of White, which shouldn't be a surprise, given that it is the largest church that exists in the world of Dark Souls. However, we get more overt confirmation from the Deacons of the Deep, those clerics who have been corrupted by their worship of the Deep and veneration of Aldrich. The Archdeacon set reads as follows: Holy garb, worn by an Archdeacon of the Cathedral of the Deep, a sign of the Way of White's highest rank. Of the 3 Archdeacons of the Deep, one stood over Aldrich's casket, with hope that he would return one day. So the Deacons of the Deep, the Cathedral of the Deep, and Aldrich himself are all corrupted elements that once belonged to the Way of White. The Way of White is, of course, the church which worships Gwyn and his family as gods, established by Gwyn's own uncle, and it has persisted for several millennia by the time of Dark Souls 3. The current head of the
Wearing Gwendolyn as a hat? Yeah, basically. I mean, it's more so like he wears it as like a skin suit. Because he is actually piloting the body, but yeah, it's basically being puppeted, right? It's not like it's like possession or anything in that sense, right? Gwendolyn's already inside Aldrich's gullet and slowly being digested. I don't know if Smough will highlight this, so we'll see, but you can actually see deeper, well, deep soul.
Church, Pontiff Sulyvahn, is situated in Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, suggesting that the Boreal Valley is the current center for this religion. This, of course, corrupted elements that once belonged to the Way of White. The Way of White is, of course, the church which worships Gwyn and his family as gods, established by Gwyn's own uncle, and it has persisted for several millennia by the time of Dark Souls 3. The current head of the church, Pontiff Sulyvahn, is situated in Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, suggesting that the Boreal Valley is the current centre for this religion. This, of course, makes sense, given Irithyll has seemingly been built below the ruins of Anor Londo itself, the original city of the gods. It is therefore fitting that Aldrich himself hails from the Boreal Valley, as is suggested by the small doll, an item which we can find within Aldrich's own tomb, and Anri also finds it here. Its item description reads as follows. In the legendary old city of Irithyll, situated in the Boreal Valley, the Pontiff Sulyvahn gave this doll to valued subjects, so that they might use it to cross the barrier when they return home. Listen carefully, and you can hear it say, "Wherever you go, the moon still sets in Irithyll. Wherever you may be, Irithyll is your home."
Yeah, so for those of the term home is also, I have to translate this as specifically homeland, because that seems to be generally the idea is that it's never referring to like, oh, a specific like house or building. Outside of the homeward miracle, that's one where it seems to be giving the idea of like the home as just like, you know, you see the menu graphic, like an actual house home. Generally, it seems to always be referring to the idea of of a country or general land of origin and things of that nature. Another thing to point out here is that I get why he's doing it, because he wants to kind of not focus so heavily on the Sulyvahn angle and kind of move on to the other stuff. But it needs to be kind of reiterated that Sulyvahn is of course the pontiff or a pope, which is typically considered the representative of God in religions like Roman Catholicism. And of course the idea being is like, well, what is he the pope? What is he the pope to? Well, of course, the Way of White and stuff like that. And with that, it's like he's acting as a representative of the god Gwyndolin. And what doesn't get carried over, of course, is the fact that Gwyndolin is not just the god, he is the chief god, i.e. the All-Father, right? Because that term is carried over from Dark Souls 1 for Lloyd. And the idea, of course, they make it clear that Lloyd himself has basically been sort of you know, not defunct is the word, but, you know, sort of torn down from his lofty position and sort of kind of discredited in recent years. So in that sense, I want to just kind of highlight that, like, we have to be understanding that in this context of the Way of White and the idea that Irithyll is at the center, it's not just the Anor Londo, it's the fact that Gwyndolin has taken over the Pantheon. Because, again, originally, the Way of White capital was in Thorland, or Sol Londo, the Haven of the Sun, the Anor Londo in the world of man, right? And the idea being that, you know, Lloyd would have been sort of the head honcho of he was essentially the king of the gods and the head of the pantheon during this period. But now that Gwyndolin's in charge and everything resulting from that regarding Sulyvahn and Aldrich and everything now instead revolves around Irithyll and Anor Londo and all that.
So this is an object that Sulyvahn would give to subjects of Irithyll, so they might find their way home. Yep. And if Aldrich possessed one, then it tracks that Aldrich himself was once a subject of Irithyll. Anri reinforces the fact that Aldrich is an Irithyll native, as she says the following about Aldrich.
We reached the Cathedral of the Deep, but Aldrich's coffin was empty. The man-eater must have left for his true home. The little doll in the empty coffin told me.
Yeah, so his true homeland is in Irithyll, and then the Cathedral of the Deep becomes essentially his new or adopted homeland, right? Because obviously he's been there for at least long enough that you can consider it his residence, right? Like, this is like, obviously it's also where he first goes back to after returning as Lord of Cinder, right? So it's fair when Henri characterized it as his home, but then after we discover he's not there, it's like, oh, he went to his true home.
Aldrich is said to hail from Irithyll in the Boreal Valley, an ancient fabled city.
So if Aldrich is from here, then it makes sense that he would end up becoming a cleric. After all, it would be the natural profession for many who grew up in the Holy City. If he is an Irithyll native, then there is another possibility. The possibility that Aldrich is related to the old gods themselves. This suggestion comes from the Irithyll appearance preset, which reads as follows. The features of the old gods, as if from legend. They say children born like this are fated to be taken to the Boreal Valley. All right, this is true. So there's a lot of, it's never clarified with Aldrich specifically, but this is, I think, a good point that Smough's making, is that generally it is true that Gwyndolin is trying to bring in divine blood to Irithyll. And obviously Sulyvahn has continued this practice because it supports the institutional authority of Irithyll. The idea is that all this blood from the gods that has basically kind of trickled down through the generations of humans and stuff that they have given birth to since the events of Dark Souls 1, when they were relatively recently and still entering the world of man. Again, keep in mind, as I cover in Abyssal Archive, the gods basically leave about a little over 100 years before the events of the game, right? So, not that long have they been with Lloyd or elsewhere, like Velka and Karim, or Fina, God knows where she gets around. So the entire idea that, you know, that these gods have kind of had children since then, and those children have had children, and now they have some traits that you're like, oh yeah, this is very much resembling the Anor Londo medials, the gods of light, as it were. But they are clearly not gods. They are clearly humans. They don't have a lot of that blood, though. Again,
the line between, you know, what constitutes a human versus a god, like, you know, these types of like demigod situations, they come up again and again actually in this game, especially. So it's actually something that's really worth considering is was Aldrich one of these sort of super empowered gods? Could that be why he ended up going to a cleric? Did he have a natural talent for holy magic because he was inherited some of that light soul power from the gods who are his ancestors, right?
The implication here is that those of the old royalty, over time, interbred with humanity, thus resulting in diluted blood passing down through the generations.
Yep.
The sign of such heritage being apparently clear in the appearance of these human descendants. So Aldrich, being an Irithyll native, may himself be related to Gwyndolin and his family, the very god he will one day devour and co-opt. Is it also possible that he gained his hunger for flesh from his divine ancestry? I say this because there is a character from the age of...
I should just clarify that I think if I was Smough, I would not have said Gwyndolin and his family. I would have said Gwyndolin and his clan of gods. Again, I don't expect Smough to use my terminology of medials, but it is important to understand that like the entirety of the gods constitutes a tribe, you know, a loose confederation, you know, a loose bloodline of relatives and people who aren't necessarily like all family or something, but they all fall under the same clan. And especially if you're familiar with like say Japanese clans and things, these can get very broad indeed. So very much like a lonely little quibble I would make here. Good evening, Loki. May I ask you a lore question about hollowing? Sure, but we're focusing here on Aldrich, so I may prioritize that. But if it's a quick and easy one, sure.
Fire, who also had a similar hunger. I, of course, refer to Smough, this channel's namesake, and the once executioner of Anor Londo. Smough seems to have been similar in power and stature to the four Knights of Gwyn, yet he was excluded from their ranks because of his dietary habits. Now, I know Smough is not a god, nor was he related to Gwyn or the old gods, but he is a contemporary of them, and easily could be...
Dietary habits. I would disagree that he was removed for dietary habits. I've talked about this before. I don't think... I've always had like kind of a tepid relationship with this idea of Smough being a cannibal. I know why. I've pointed this out, but I feel like this is something that I don't think has gained currency in the JP community since its originally inception for a good reason. And I think mostly this idea is, what's the word? I think it's only true in the broadest sense that Smough has definitely been, kind of thriving off the power of souls that he's absorbed, like we see with Ornstein. So I don't think that we should apply it to a broader cannibalism habit with those that he smashed and their families and things that I've talked about in the past. But that's a separate discussion.
Considered as part of the old pantheon. Perhaps being an Irithyllian means that Aldrich could claim descent from this iconic figure, and their shared appetites are not their only...
Again, I've also pointed out, I don't think Smough is even related to the gods in any way. I think he's just a giant. I don't think he is a medial even. I would also argue that I think if we're talking about the idea of cannibalism and any connection to there, it'd be better to talk about New Londo in relation to the Dark and the Abyss and stuff like that. But that's a separate discussion as well.
Connection. For one, we fight Aldrich in the same location that the chosen undead once fought Smough. Perhaps this means nothing, or perhaps it is a subtle hint at the two characters' shared heritage.
Well, you also fight Ornstein, so like, you can make the argument there too. Like, I have to agree. I think this probably means nothing. It's an interesting idea, but I think it means nothing. Do you think the gods fat shamed Smough? I don't think so, because I don't think he's fat. I think concept art makes it very clear he's buff under there. The armor is fat, but he ain't. He's on that Katarina grind. They make themselves look bigger and rounder than they are.
To build on this, we are able to get Smough's armor in Dark Souls 3 by purchasing it from the Shrine Handmaiden. However, this only unlocks once you defeat Aldrich. For context, most boss armors only unlock for purchase after you defeat the boss associated with them.
All right, so here's the thing about that. You're technically defeating Gwyndolin. And there's a point made in Gwyndolin. You get Smough's hammer from Gwyndolin's manor, and you get other items from Anor Londo and Dark Souls 1 from Gwyndolin, and there's a connection there. So I think that this is probably not the right way to look at this. I think what you should be seeing is like, Gwyndolin has collected all the stuff related to Smough, Ornstein, Goth, Tarkus, all these figures since the events of Dark Souls 1, and in some cases he's handed them out, like we see with the Tarkus armor to Zorig or to what's it called, well, I guess he didn't really hand it out in this case, but like the Hawkeye stuff ends up going to one of the giant slaves under Sulyvahn's regime and stuff like that. So I'm just saying that I don't think this is the angle to take with it, but hey, I like this. This definitely sounds new. I haven't heard this one before for sure. If no eat people, why people eater shaped? He's big, he's round, he can clearly fit a few hundred bodies in there. Let's see. We have both the dragon bone holding a soul and a dragon bone used as a mace. Probably gods consider bones like something important, similar to how blood is a vessel for the soul. Yes, I would say that bones are probably important because bone marrow comes from the soul. Because I forget the biology exactly, but from what I understand, blood is mostly produced in your bone marrow, correct? And that marrow is then what spreads into your vessels and things. So in that sense, if the idea is that the blood is a medium of the soul, then the idea the blood that at least significant concentrations of soul would pass through the bones. I don't think that that's unusual, especially what we see with skeletons and stuff. So I think what the idea would probably be is that the largest concentration is probably around the heart and the brain. Obviously, the heart is continually producing and sending that blood, pumping that blood through there. But we probably also have it where a lot of that stuff through the brain and the heart probably gets transferred into through and into the bones, and then that helps it. Essentially the skeleton kind of acts as kind of like a framework to help pass soul power through the rest of the more fleshy parts of the body and be able to, in the form of blood, be able to kind of interfere and through capillaries and blood vessels and stuff, be able to circulate through the entire body for life and all that stuff. So I think that's a reasonable assertion.
This then suggests that Aldrich has some connection to Smough. As for what this connection is, remains open to interpretation, and one interpretation could be what I have suggested, that Aldrich is somehow related to Smough. Others have suggested that Aldrich and Smough are one and the same, that the executioner became a cleric, and he continued with his man-eating habits.
He's dead. No, just no.
However, this is not a theory I personally agree with. I just thought it was worth mentioning as it is a prominent theory. Of course, Aldrich's connection to Smough could simply be thematic. They are both man-eaters who we fight in the Anor Londo Cathedral. Aside from this, Aldrich is a big sludge monster, and therefore he doesn't have any boss armor of his own to provide the player with as a reward. Thus, Smough's armor could be seen as a fitting replacement and a nice callback. I'm not sure what I believe. I do like the possibility that, as an Irithyll native, he is related to Smough, thus inheriting his cannibalistic tendencies. Given the name of this channel,
like I said, I do not believe in Smough as this idea of Smough as a cannibal. I get why. Again, I've even acknowledged it in Abyssal Archive in the past, though in the most recent edition, I've actually changed to drop it because, again, I myself don't support it. I don't think that there's actually really all that to really go with that interpretation. It would be reading a double entendre into the text for Smough when we're talking about the flesh and bone that he crushes, which again can be used as an idiom similar to how we say flesh and blood. But again, this would be the idea that he'd be killing family and stuff, and people would then be trying to derive the cannibalism stuff from how he sort of takes sustenance out of people. But again, I think the only way you can really interpret that is in the same way you would interpret it from, say, Darkwraith using life drain. That in that case, it would be like, they're eating life and consuming them in a kind of a vampiric manner, but it's not in literal cannibalism as what we see with Aldrich. So a bit different here. And again, Smough is dead. This is something the game makes clear. This is not something that's even worth considering. He's a dead man. We kill him. He's a mandatory boss fight and all that stuff. Like there's just no scenario where Smough should be alive in order to become Aldrich. And if so, why would he be called Aldrich, right? Like why wouldn't he go through his other name? Like there's just so much wrong with that.
Wanted an excuse to finally talk about the big fella. Either way, Aldrich would be recruited into the clergy, and according to Hawkwood, it was during this time that he developed his vile man-eating habits. Aldrich didn't eat humans because he needed to. He enjoyed their suffering. This is something we learn from Aldrich's sapphire and ruby rings, both of which read the following. Aldrich, infamous for his appetite for flesh, apparently had the desire to share with others his joy of imbibing the final shudders of life while luxuriating in his victims' screams. Aldrich took joy in the final moments and screams of his victims, painting him as a truly sadistic monster. A horrifying thing to consider is that those consumed by Aldrich may well still be alive, at least in some sense. If you listen closely to Aldrich's boss model, then you can hear whimpers and cries from the body of Gwendolyn, as if some level of awareness remains to him, and that he is in great pain. We know that Aldrich's process of digestion was very slow, thanks to the description of life on Scythe, so it is very possible that his victims maintain some awareness as they are slowly digested.
Is he going to show them?
Supported by the sludge creatures we face in Anor Londo, which are likely parts of Aldrich, part of his body which now seems to extend through all of the cathedral. Again, if you listen carefully, you can hear moans and cries coming from these masses. This just adds to the horror.
Okay, Smough, that's the first mistake I'm gonna have to deduct you on. That's not from the what is it called, the crawling carrion of Aldrich. That is from the actual Deacons. The Deacons are the ones making that noise, so that's a huge mistake. You should have double checked on that by killing the Deacons first before you tried to make that type of argument. That's just not true. They are separate pieces of Aldrich for sure, and you could even make a case that some semblance of the souls of those he has devoured may be what is piloting them rather than necessarily Aldrich's will itself. But this is not the piece of evidence you think it is. I'm actually surprised by that. That's a really easy thing to have double checked and made sure that you were right on. The entire on that subject, actually, the notion that, you know, Gwendolyn is still alive to some sense. Again, I think those were good points. I still would have included the menu graphic. Again, the fact that you see Gwendolyn's soul in there as it's being devoured in the menu graphic shows that it's not completely been digested and broken off into pieces. It's scattered to the wind. So if you want to make a case that there's some element of Gwendolyn that's still attached to his body, even as that soul is being subsumed by Aldrich, I think that would have been nice. Good to see you in the chat, Nick. Anyway, moving on.
And cruelty of Aldrich's acts. As we already know, he enjoyed the cries of his victims, and now we need to consider that these cries of pain were not silenced quickly. This is likely why we see skeletons and body parts sticking out of Aldrich. These are the tortured souls of those who are still being devoured by the Man-Eater. For those familiar with Elden Ring, Aldrich's qualities certainly call Rykard to mind, and in Rykard's case we also know that his digested victims remained part of him, consciously suffering, while they were merged with his body. And I think that is also what we're seeing with Aldrich here. This habit must have started while he was still serving as a cleric in Irithyll.
Also, I think what Smough should have highlighted is that the actual arena where you fight him has more of these bones and body parts and things. Like, all of that is present there. I would have liked if he kind of showed it in the arena a bit more. Hey, I am good to see you in the chat.
My reason for believing so is that Hawkwood places his transformation into sludge as something that happened before he was placed in the Cathedral of the Deep. This is pretty shocking if you think about it. A cleric eating people and transforming into a sludge monster, right in the heart of Irithyll, and all while he was a cleric of the Way of White.
It sounds shocking until you realize, oh yeah, Sulyvahn's in charge. Not so shocking anymore. Like, again, like Sulyvahn likes to keep a front, likes to keep the important front, right? But he doesn't care. He doesn't care how corrupt and how vile and how depraved his clergymen are, as long as they're keeping the institution running. The institution itself is what's important to him, and only so far as it gives him the cover for him to be able to do what he truly cares about, which is the study of the world through sorcery.
Hawkwood then says that as a result of this, they stuck him in the Cathedral of the Deep.
Yep.
The suggestion being that the authorities of the Way of White realized that Aldrich was becoming a problem, and they needed to remove him from Irithyll.
Specifically, he was like imprisoned or captured, right? So the idea that basically, you know, like, okay, we are going to lock you away in here and where you're going to stay. It was basically a house arrest, essentially.
So that he wouldn't cause a scandal in the religion's capital. Thus, removing him to the distant Cathedral of the Deep was the best way to manage such a scandal, as they could just publicly refer to this as a new appointment for Aldrich. A clever public relations move, all things considered. It is likely that Pontiff Sulyvahn was the one who had Aldrich removed to the cathedral. Remember, Aldrich seems to have had the small doll in his possession when he was sent to the cathedral. This doll is an item that is granted to followers by Sulyvahn specifically, suggesting that Aldrich was sent on his way by the Pontiff, but was given this doll as a sort of consolation. The revelation that it was Sulyvahn who banished Aldrich is interesting for a number of reasons. Firstly, it shows that Sulyvahn has been in power as the Pontiff for a long time, at least since Aldrich's rise to power, and so has held that position for a significant period of time. Secondly, it is very much in line with what we know about Sulyvahn, who is a man primarily concerned with garnering power and then preserving it. We see this during the course of the game, in which he desperately tries to prevent us from linking the fire, as doing so would upset the status quo, of which he...
No, Smough, that's not what Sulyvahn's trying to do. No. Sulyvahn's not trying to stop us from linking the fire. Sulyvahn is trying to stop us because we are a fucking annoying invader after all the other shit he's had to put up with thanks to Aldrich. So, like, no. We're getting ahead of ourselves here, Smough. The reason why, like, Sulyvahn is interested in preserving power and everything like that, and the reason why he wants the quote-unquote status quo preserved is because he's trying to hold everything together. And as is, he's already in the position to start transitioning from his old role as the leader of the Way of White to becoming this sort of king of the deep type situation after overthrowing Aldrich effectively, right? So in theory, we could have even worked with Sulyvahn to this end. Now, obviously, Sulyvahn would have probably backstabbed us anyway, and I don't think he's in the mood to have to work with anybody right now when we've gone through killing all his guards and stuff leading up to this. Like, the guy's gone through a lot lately, okay? Like, catch him a break. So Smough just does the soul right that gods do anyway to absorb, which is totally not like consuming souls. Classic medial hypocrisy. Bad when Smough, good when it's God. Yes, that's the point, right? This is the entire point with Smough, is that Smough is, you know, Smough is very much not that out of line for what the gods do. Again, they could have killed Smough. They could have had the executioner executed if they really thought he was this bad, crazy psychopath and all that stuff. No, the problem was not with what Smough was doing for the gods as an executioner. The problem was having that type of executioner who is so blatantly, you know, dishonorable, as a knight, right? As a knight recognized by Gwyn. It was purely a public relations move. It was purely about saving face, because the gods, for the gods, this like you said, hypocritical ideal that, you know, they have this, we're the good, we're wonderful, you know, we're totally the opposite of the dark, you know, go with the light and all that. It's all about preserving an image for the sake of control and being able to preserve their institution for as long, you know, they would prefer indefinitely, but at least as long as they can, especially after the fire begins to fade. So yeah, the whole thing with Smough is again, we're getting off topic from Aldrich, but the entire thing with Smough is completely unrelated to like anything that, like, you know, he's actually doing in some great moral transgression or whatever. The only time that the gods care about, you know, what you are doing is if it's obviously a threat to them or a hindrance to them. That's it. That's all it really requires. And in the case of Gwyn, like, it just becomes obvious Smough had the power. Who knows how many souls he's taken from all those he's executed over the years and thrived on. You know, he's been able to, greedily, quote unquote, devour all those souls and assimilate them straight into himself for more strength and ability. He clearly had all the prerequisites to become a recognized Knight of Gwyn. The problem was, of course, just the fact that, again, under Gwyn, it would have looked bad. Sulyvahn doesn't care about Fire of the Deep. He cares about power and staying in a exactly. That's the point. For Sully, what was so important for him all this time was the Way of White, because Gwyndolin was the chief god of the Way of White. You know, once Aldrich devoured Gwyndolin, Sully lost his foundation to justify his position of authority, which gave him large political coverage across the world, right? Like, just imagine right now, like, I don't know, you're the Pope in Roman Catholicism, and like, I don't even know how to even get there, but I don't know. You uncover a letter which says that, oh, St. Peter actually never said, you know, St. Peter wrote a letter that said that, you know, the Pope wasn't actually going to be his successor or anything like that. And the Bishop of Rome is basically illegitimate, right? Like, essentially that. And now the Pope has this problem where now he can't really claim himself as the successor of Peter and the Vicar of Christ, because all of that's just basically the rug's been pulled from under him. Well, now what's the Pope going to do? Well, for Aldrich, he's like, for Sulyvahn, he's like, well, Aldrich left this entire giant cult here, and he's made a good point about how he's ultimately going to be the one victorious here, because the world as it is in this, like, with the fire linking not being properly respected, is becoming a stagnant dark, which will eventually produce the deep for the entire world, and therefore will become an age of the deep sea eventually when fire does fade. And therefore he can make this argument that he is the one that's going to in the position to win out, and he's just kind of accelerating that by getting rid of the gods and sort of cementing his path to kingship, right? And Sulyvahn could easily just take that over and subsume that, which just seems to be the idea with having the beasts secretly, covertly deal with what's his fake McDonald and stuff like that. So it's very clear that Sulyvahn is kind of making the moves now that he's been placed in this subordinate position by Aldrich. But again, this is so off topic from what we're getting to. So
is at the top of the power structure. Given Vort and the Dancer are proxies of the Pontiff, we could see Sulyvahn as the primary antagonist of Dark Souls 3, a man desperately clinging on to his own power base, and it's no surprise that he deals with Aldrich in the same manner.
I would not call him the primary antagonist of Dark Souls 3. Sulyvahn is just one of many players in this game. I think a lot of people want Sulyvahn to be the big bad because it simplifies things for them. It simplifies things in their mind that, oh, you know, all of this is really just Sulyvahn and he's the big one who's responsible for everything. That's not true. The reality is Dark Souls 3 is a lot more interesting because it's a lot more complicated than all that. There's a lot of factions and big bads, and they're all vying in this era where fire linking has become this endless cycle that is not really accomplished anything at this point. It is becoming less effective over time. It is creating huger vacuums the more longer it takes between fire linking. So I think that this is, I understand why Smough is going with this, because this is a common understanding. I think that this is a complete misreading, though, of Sulyvahn's role and his importance in the whole area. Again, obviously, he's a very important figure, very major character in the history and of events and everything like that. But I think we're inflating his role here. Howdy, Xavier. Good to see you as well. We know that hollowing is caused by humanity within men, that when the fire fades and the ring of fire can no longer imprison, begins devouring the white soul where the conscience resides. Okay, wouldn't it then be more accurate if undead who have become hollow dropped a white soul consumed by darkness like Artoria's soul as direct proof of this effect of the dark soul? Theoretically possible, sure. That could happen. It sort of depends on whether or not they would want to show the soul we have as the parts that have not been devoured quite yet, or versus the pieces that get completely subsumed. We do see something kind of similar to this where in Dark Souls 2, they show those who, especially those who are in ordinary darkness for prolonged periods of time, have a similar effect where they get kind of munched on, right? We see the dark starting to consume their souls as well. Though obvious, it's very similar to Artorias, though obviously it's not the exact same process that having, like, you know, living humanity or anything doing that. But yeah, you can't, if the devs wanted to, they could totally do that. Here's the thing. It's at the whim of the devs. This is sort of the same thing I say where it's like, oh, you know, the different stats that change, or whether or not, you know, we don't need a fire keeper in Dark Souls 1 when we need a fire keeper in Dark Souls 2. A lot of these things are sort of at the artistic license of the developers. They obviously have they have an undergirding logic to them that we can extrapolate across all the games and apply fairly. But it's one of these things where not every specific manifestation of gameplay mechanics or categorization of items and things like that are necessarily always going to be 100% reflective of all the possibilities that could, will, or should exist in the given setting. Sulyvahn's like Seath in DS1. He has his agents around the kingdom doing things, and his dominion is one of the few still kind of working. Very, very kind of. Yeah, I think that's a good. I think that's a good comparison to Seath and stuff like that. Where it's like, yeah, you know, Seath is an active player. He's a major player. He's obviously has a significant influence in the various areas of the game we explore and stuff like that. But I wouldn't call Seath the big bad as a result, right? Like, would you call Gwendolyn really the big bad? Would you call Frampt really the big bad? Like, okay, maybe or whatever, because they're like the larger architects behind a lot of this stuff. But like, I wouldn't say like they're like the most important figures either. You have then, of course, like, you know, the Daughters of Chaos and Izalith and Chaos Demons and all that stuff. And then you have Nito as kind of like a separate thing. Like, every character has their role. And really, if you want to think about the big bad, it's always going to go back to Gwyn. Gwyn is always going to be the one who's really like, you know, he's the ultimate fall guy for everything, right? Like, all the stuff that's happening is ultimately because of him and his decisions and his actions. I think Sully does show his lack of care for the gods through his use of sorcery. Even it's more accepted by the way of white now. Sulyvahn is an advanced sorcerer. Okay, this is true. The thing is that Sully does it under the umbrella of Gwendolyn, who is a sorcerer himself. And no one is going to claim that Gwendolyn or his moon cult or anything and their any use of sorcery within their faction would be, you know, outside of the realm or what have you, right? Like, even when Seath was still respected, he was also using sorcery. This was not a problem. Velka uses sorcery and other forms of magic that are unrelated to miracles as well. So, again, you could make the case that, yeah, Sully obviously doesn't have the same respect for the gods as a sorcerer, but at the same time, like, his god was a sorcerer. So it's like, again, I think the thing with Sully and his disrespect for the gods has more to do with the profane flame and his interest in powers which the gods would normally forbid. Could you mention what other facts are observably active in the game other than Londor and Pontiff folk? So, okay, you have Londor, you have Pontiff, you have the various pillars in Lothric. Now, some of them are more active than others. You have the Angelic Faith, which is, again, it's kind of backed by Londor, essentially. You know, it's kind of like a front group, you know? Think of it like, say, probably topical, but think of like, say, some of the countries in the Middle East and some of their historic support for terrorist organizations, similar relationship you have between Londor and, say, the Angelic Faith. But the point would be that you have essentially you have the Angelic Faith technically as like kind of its own faction, but that's also a split off of the Knights and their own faction. The Scholars and stuff have been their own, and obviously have the First Scholar especially, who's been his own active agent in the events up until, at least until recently. Obviously, of course, you have Osseros, who, again, him and Lothric and the government structure, they kind of split at some point. So you have Osseros kind of operating independently of what the general royal government is doing. Of course, there's the high priestess and the general clergy, which are, of course, acting on their own, kind of coordinating stuff with their, obviously, the twin princes in his own faction are doing their own things. I cover this a lot in Lothric's End. It's like all the various like it's the whole Lothric Civil War thing is such a huge, like, it's just a huge, like, clusterfuck of so many pieces going their own way. Then, of course, you have the Cathedral of the Deep and what they're doing, of course, under Aldrich and stuff like that. And they have, of course, influence over the what's it called? The undead settlement and things like that, obviously. So that kind of had Sulyvahn, and they're kind of competing with like Sulyvah's forces up until the events of the game where we talking about, right? So like, again, Sulyvahn still has influence there. You have the Chaos Demons. They're technically their own thing, but they're basically defunct by this point. Like, obviously, we're just kind of cleaning up their remnants at the end there. So I don't know if they would really count at this juncture. Same thing with Faron, right? Like, there's still the Grus and stuff, and the Crystal Sages are, again, Crystal Sage are a bit weird because they're kind of like, they kind of obviously straddle between different factions and doing their own thing at the same time. So again, there's a lot. And of course, how can we forget? There's freaking Wolnir and Karthus. Like, Wolnir's just kind of sit and chill, like, over his own like bone empire and being like, listen, man, I don't care about any of this shit. I just kind of want to rule forever over my little like my little fallen kingdom of death. Okay, like Wolnir has it all figured out, and we kill him anyway. He's like, I don't want to deal with any of this shit. I feel like Sully was the strongest player by the events of DS3. Would he be the strongest player? I don't know, because Lothric exists, and Lothric is like the big capital. It's hard to say. It's either Irithyll or Lothric who would be the biggest player. So Sully or Osseros up until the obviously the major Civil War events happen. It's also hard to say like currently during the events of the game itself, because obviously we're seeing Sully when he is literally just being, cut down at the knees by Aldrich, and he's trying to claw his power back yet. So it's a bit weird there. Again, there's a bit of a lingering lag, because obviously before Aldrich shows up, Sully had already like sort of sent out his Boreal Knights to help kind of control the situation in Lothric, because Lothric's basically now flailing. So now he's trying to help get some control over this and take things over. But then Aldrich shows up, and then kind of like now he's the one that's trying to like, keep things under control in his own place and all that. So again, like I said, Dark Souls 3 has like just a lot of events and factions and things. They're all kind of working and crisscrossing over time. Guinevere's her own thing, right? Like Guinevere also kind of fucked off and stuff like that, but she was never really like a huge player. She was more so a political chip, right? So a bit different, I think. In every video about who's the villain in X Souls game, my answer is Gwyn, Marika, Lawrence. Others mostly are antagonistic player, maybe more evil in some cases. Yeah, I'd agree. I think that's fair. Again, it's I can't speak to Marika because I haven't finished my full analysis of all that stuff, so I don't know exactly what Marika's role in the larger narrative side really is, but definitely with Lawrence. I also feel that a lot of the appeal to Dark Souls is the fact that most of the big players are sort of larger than life background figures almost, right? Like they sort of like set up the system working within what we're seeing in terms of all the terrible things that are happening, but it's usually all these other natural smaller characters and factions and things that emerge from it. I think Dark Souls 3 does this the best in terms of telling a complex political narrative, because obviously with the lores and stuff, it's kind of very classical fantasy. Everyone's kind of like doing their own thing and they're all living together, quote unquote, in harmony and stuff. And then everything changed when the Fire Nation faded. The Civil War was such an intriguing narrative hook that was so well conveyed by the mental. Yeah, I really love how Lothric was done. Lothric is like Boletaria 2.0. Like Miyazaki was like, I want to do Boletaria again. And he's like, okay, I'm going to tell the story of Boletaria in the Dark Souls universe. And then everyone's like, but Miyazaki, you already did that with the Kingdom of Baldur and used it as a throwaway to show the power scaling and all that. He's like, I don't care, I'm doing it again. And that's how we got where we are. Anyway, let's continue. We're only 15 minutes into this video.
and so he sends his proxies, the Boreal Knights, Vort, and the Dancer, to try and prevent us from claiming the Lord's ashes we require. So at the time that Aldrich was
Again, this is not true. I think Smough is going to regret saying this because, again, if I'm working with, if I get the pleasure of working with him again for the Sulyvahn stuff, I think I'm going to show that Sulyvahn's a lot more of a nuanced character than he realizes. People have grossly oversimplified him, unfortunately.
serving as a cleric, Sulyvahn would have seen his habits as a PR disaster waiting to happen, and so he reassigned Aldrich to the Cathedral of the Deep, keeping the depraved cleric far from his precious Irithyll. What Sulyvahn
There's a civil war in Lothric. It's literally ongoing. That's literally ongoing, Xavier. the entire events of the game is an ongoing civil war.
likely didn't anticipate is that Aldrich would one day rival him in influence, corrupting the Deacons and turning them to his cause over time. Eventually Aldrich would return to Irithyll, and he would be beyond the Pontiff's power to control. For now, however, the Cathedral of the Deep would be turned into his prison, and the Cathedral's resources would be geared towards feeding his insatiable appetites. But to understand the unique circumstances that would arise during Aldrich's time here, we first have to assess the history of the Cathedral of the Deep and its original purpose.
Now, I don't expect Smough to cover this. So he may get some of the timeline scale wrong here. But again, just to kind of speak ahead, when you look at the Dark Souls 3 in its totality, the Cathedral of the Deep doesn't have that long of a history. In fact, it's likely been founded within living memory of most of the people in Lothric, at least. So it's not really that old, despite how like big and grand it is. It's something where it seems like it very quickly kind of developed, where it's like, okay, a bunch of people are going to the Deep Spring, and then like, you know, okay, well, eventually we're going to build that up and create a chapel here. We're going to start burying people around the chapel and stuff like that. And then, okay, well, we're getting so many people through the chapel, we're going to build a bigger cathedral and church, you know, the bigger church gets made now. So it seems to be this kind of place that very quickly scales up because it becomes something that's very attractive. Obviously, when you're a giant holy spring that's, you know, founded around a bunch of places related to undeath and a very large kingdom, which is taking in immigrants from a fallen kingdom that has been corrupted by the abyss from Londor, then yeah, that's definitely going to happen. But just kind of want to highlight, I'm not expecting him to kind of like say like, oh, you know, the Cathedral of Deep's only been like, you know, only about maybe 50-ish years old, or maybe a little more than that. But just kind of FYI, it's an interesting point to consider.
Of the Ashen One's arrival, the Cathedral of the Deep is one that venerates the Deep and is loyal to Aldrich. The loyalty of the Deacons to Aldrich is evidenced in the existence of the covenant known as the Aldrich Faithful, which itself is overseen by one of the Archdeacons of the Cathedral. It is directly spelled out.
Again, now, it should be clarified, the Aldrich Faithful isn't actually the covenant's name. The name is a localization choice. It's actually the Defenders of the God Eater. So really, it's just a small subset of the larger Deep cult that is dedicated specifically to the defense of Aldrich. So it's not like everyone is part of this specific covenant. This is a covenant seemingly between McDonald and the locals in Irithyll for the local cultists in Irithyll, I should clarify, for the purposes of making sure that their God Eater is allowed to eat his god in peace.
In the item description of the Deacons of the Deep Soul, wherein Aldrich is described as Archdeacon Royce's master. But that was not the original purpose of the Cathedral of the Deep. What has always interested me is the Cathedral's original purpose, and how it was corrupted over time by Aldrich and the Deep. As I mentioned earlier, the Cathedral of the Deep was home to Deacons, who once belonged to the Way of White, meaning that this was a Way of White institution at the time of Aldrich's exile.
Yeah.
As for the purpose of this cathedral and its relationship to the Deep.
Again, I don't expect Smough to cover this either, but again, reminder, they're not actually deacons, they're bishops. Because, again, you may recall in Dark Souls 1, the localization called all the priests bishops. But then the bishops actually appeared in the sequel, and then it's like, well, what the hell do we do? I guess we just call them deacons. So it's all screwed up. The priests, the priests have been called bishops. The bishops have been called deacons. Like, what next? We're going to get deacons in, like, the Dark Souls 4, and we're going to have to call them priests? Like, it's going to be... It's so screwed up.
This is something that is never directly explained to us. As I will suggest in this chapter, I believe that the cathedral has had
Also, just to highlight, obviously it highlights the importance of the cathedral as well, because they are trying to get not just priests, but a higher rank of bishop inducted into the cathedral. So they're trying to get like some of the best clerics that they can muster for the sake of, you know, containing the Deep after it is corrupted and stuff like that. So that's an important point to hear. I mean, the fact that they have 3 archbishops kind of there overseeing it, obviously part of that's because Sully sending McDonald over with Aldrich's imprisonment, but it kind of gives you the sense of like how important, you know, how important and how dangerous the Deep was, that they needed all of this, you know, elite force to handle it.
different beliefs that tell a story of the cathedral's slow conversion to the worship of the deep. I believe that when the cathedral was first established, the Way of White saw the deep as a holy body of water, one that could cleanse the darkness within mankind. I then believe that the deep was corrupted over time, becoming a stagnant body of darkness, full of dangerous creatures. As a result, the second belief of the cathedral was one of containment, a holy site which would be used to subdue the dangers of the deep, a place dedicated to the confinement of the horrors that have taken hold of the deep.
Okay.
And this is why they would eventually employ the powerful cathedral knights. Finally, under Aldrich's influence, they would begin to instead worship the horrors of the deep, with Aldrich as the messiah of this new religion. That's the 3 stages of belief found at the cathedral, as I see it. That said, let us examine the first stage. The Cathedral of the Deep was seemingly overseen by 3 archdeacons, the highest rank within the Way of White below the pontiff. This is something we learn from the archdeacon set, with each piece telling us the ultimate fate of all 3.
Again, it wasn't like all 3 were there already. I think Smough's a little off on this one. It was probably mostly just Royce. Maybe you can make a case for what's his face? Not the our Biden boy. Oh, I forget now off the top of my head. It'll come to me. I'm sure one of you guys will remind me. It'll come to me. Hey, Nobre, good to see you in the chat. But anyway, so we have essentially, you know, maybe 2 of them there, but like McDonald definitely is coming there with Aldrich, so we don't get the 3rd one until later. And obviously, once Aldrich shows up, that deep isn't staying pure for very long.
The last 3 to hold these positions were MacDonald, Royce, and Klimt. Royce and MacDonald eventually become servants of Aldrich, and Klimt would serve Rosaria. In time, we will discuss.
Klimt, that's the one, yeah. So Klimt, it would be the 3rd one. Again, I think you can make a case that it wasn't necessarily that there were 3 archbishops at the time. There may have just been 1, and then the others get added on for political and, you know, just generally, you know, priorities of resources reasons. Again, becomes very important. Obviously, MacDonald's there for as long as Aldrich is there, and then he stays behind because they need him to help with the containment and stuff, because he's teaching them flame sorcery. And then you have obviously Royce, who may have always been there. He's also looks like the oldest based on his beard and stuff like that. And then of course you have Klimt, who seems to be more so a holy paladin warrior type. So it'd be a little odd if he's kind of just been chilling in this non-fighting area for so long. So I think it's more likely he's a more recent arrivee, if I had to guess. Yeah, thanks guys for reminding me about Klimt.
All 3 of these characters, but for now it is just worth acknowledging that this cathedral was so important that it demanded 3 of these high-ranking clerics to oversee it. These 3 were accompanied by a host of regular deacons, and their robes were coloured red, and as their description tells us, this colour is meant to symbolise the flame. As we will come to discuss, this is fitting, as the cathedral is very much concerned with the primacy of the flame over the dark which exists within man. As an aside, it is therefore interesting that the Deacons of the Deep would eventually take a deep purple for their robes, showing their corruption of purpose over time, replacing the red of the flame with the purple of the deep.
It should be noted that this is only really applying to MacDonald, this blue robe look that they have, and obviously the blue is more so related to you know, it's what all the bishops and stuff who are like high enough rank within Aldrich's cult that he brings them with them, right? Like we only see a handful stay behind with Royce to protect his coffin. So
we know that the deep was not always a place of corruption, something we learn via deep protection, which reads as follows. The deep was originally a peaceful and sacred place, but it became the final resting place for many abhorrent things. This tale of the deep offers protection for those who worship amidst those horrors. The term sacred suggests that the deep was once viewed as something holy to the Way of White. If the Way of White once considered the deep to be sacred, then it suggests that the cathedral was not first built to contain the deep. It was likely founded to venerate the deep as something sacred, peaceful, and cleansing. Containment would only become its function when the deep's nature changed over time, and I just wanted to emphasize that nuance. At this juncture of the video, I want to give a shout out to friend of the channel, Loki, whose articles on Aldrich, the deep, and related subjects were a huge influence and source of information for this video. I will be referencing Loki directly at numerous points during this video, but just wanted to acknowledge that his articles have very much influenced my thinking on this subject in general. It would mean a great deal to me if you checked out Loki's articles on these subjects, which are linked below. Loki, in an article on the Deep, highlights the pool of water that is found in the Cathedral of the Deep, which appears to be a location of significance, given it is enclosed by the cathedral structure and has various balconies that overlook it. He suggests that this pool was once used in certain cleansing rituals, in an attempt to purge the dark from within man, and that this was what the Deep was before its corruption, a holy spring of cleansing waters, and its presence was what prompted the Way of White to build a cathedral here, a place in which the dark of man can be purged from adherents. This would certainly explain the cleansing chapel, and the evangelist's preoccupation with cleansing curses. Even in Dark Souls 1, we can see that a foundational belief of this religion is that the dark within man is something bad, that must be purged and offered to the flame. Thus, it really isn't a stretch to believe that a cathedral would be founded here, seeing the Deep as a holy spring, in which the impurities of man can be expelled. Aside from the cleansing chapel's very name, which itself suggests this site was once used to cleanse people, we also have the item description of the notched wit, the item which is found with it.
I know that guy! Hey! This may be a random question, so feel free to ignore. Why is the Sword of Avowed, an item from Londor, used a common roof decoration in the Ring City? I do talk about this in the in my Ring City article. Or was it Londor? I forget which one it is, but I do talk about this. The implication is most likely that either that the Sword of Avowed is the tool that was used to first create the Seal of Fire in man, as in it was basically the means with which the dark sign was engraved into the bones of our spines. But Either way, though, there does seem to be this idea that it has a close and important role in the Ring City's heritage, which Londor therefore inherits. So, like, it's kind of this thing where it's like, this is Londor trying to preserve memory, and again, like I say, in the argument of the dark side as a dark sign tool to kind of subvert the symbolism of the ring, which the gods had used to shackle man, and then use it as a symbol to be sold. Now man will triumph over the gods and all that stuff. Okay, so yeah, Ring City and Londor Theses. Yeah, I don't remember which one it is, no Bray. I can't remember. Maybe I talked about it in both, and it's like different points about this, but yeah, I do talk about those in the article. Like always, guys, you can check the link in the description to my website if you ever want to check this stuff. It's all here. Anyway, back to the vid.
In the Cleansing Chapel. I'm going to read the Japanese translation of this item that can be found on the fandom wiki, because I believe it is far more descriptive and revealing. Its description reads as follows. Whip with sharp thorny spikes that shred the skin and force bleeding, used in the Chapel of Cleansing, because the rituals requires drips to be cleansed. Again, this whip speaks of cleansing rituals, in which bloodletting was seen as a relevant part of the process. As an aside, the evangelists do wield this weapon, with it being a permanent fixture on their belt. All of this paints a picture of the...
Again, it should be noted this term for cleansing also has specifically the connotation of wiping. So there's the idea that the whip will cause you to bleed. That blood will obviously spray or splatter on the floor, so you'll have a bunch of drippings that will end up on the floor, and those drippings would then be wiped away. So what the description is really telling you is that, okay, this chapel of cleansing requires something to be cleansed because it's really talking about like wiping something, like with a cloth, right? So like, you do a little rotation. You guys can't see my hands right now, but you do the little circle on the ground with your cloth right there, and it wipes away the blood and stuff. And that's the tradition that is being referenced here, is this type of idea that we need something to wipe, so let's use your blood.
Cathedral's original purpose. People would come here to have the dark of man expelled from them. They would be flogged, so that the dark might be exsanguinated from their body, and then they would likely bathe in the sacred waters of the spring. Again, this original purpose of cleansing was something I had never put together myself, so shout out to Loki for this particular theory. The evangelists of the cathedral also likely preach the holiness of these miracle waters, encouraging people to travel to it and cleanse the darkness within them. After all,
it should be noted, I don't think that the evangelists in particular had a role here before the Aldrich Deep stuff, personally. Maybe they did. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to exclude it entirely, but I just don't see anything really to be like, oh, maybe they were spreading the word of this. Again, maybe to the undead settlement at some point you can make that case. I don't know, because the history with the undead settlement and there seems to only go so far back as the road of sacrifice. So again, I don't know how I feel about trying to say that, oh, they were like spreading the word of this beforehand when. Yeah, it doesn't sound right to me personally.
The voice line that they shout before their fire grab attack speaks of cleansing a curse via the flame. That curse is likely the curse of the dark and undeath. Loki also highlights the statues found within the cathedral, one that seems to show a human overcome by the pus of man, as well as the ones which expel corrosive material when you approach, both of which Loki believes are meant to indicate the corrupting influence of the dark. If cleansing was the focus of the cathedral, then it makes sense that the cleansing chapel is named so. Holy waters, sacred springs, and baptisms are all common aspects of real-world religions, and I thus find Loki's theory surrounding the cathedral's original purpose to be very plausible and compelling.
Again, this is also something where if you're familiar with Shintoism, this is just like a basic feature. Just the general idea of hara and stuff like that, like just this idea of like exercising or cleansing, especially through water, flowing water. Like it's a trope at this point when it comes to Miyazaki games, but like it's very much rooted in this Japanese Shintoism.
There is also evidence that one of the cathedral's original patrons was Katha, the goddess of tears, a fitting god to be associated with a holy pool of water. We can get evidence of the cathedral's change in beliefs when we look at some of the main altars found throughout the cathedral and in the cleansing chapel. At the front of these altars is a frieze that depicts the Deacons of the Deep, no doubt a representation of their new worship of the deep. What is interesting is that these fonts have clearly been placed in front of other statues, with this hidden statue likely representing the original beliefs of the cathedral. Understanding this allows us to realize that the cathedral has been slowly repurposed, as the beliefs of its attendants evolved over time. I therefore think it is reasonable for us to see the statue of the weeping goddess to be a representation of the cathedral's original function. There is also good reason to believe that this female figure was once the main deity of the cathedral, as the covered statue at the main central altar is also the same. This is likely apparent to most players, given the similar silhouette evident beneath the cloth. However, it can be unequivocally confirmed using camera tools to peek underneath this cloth, where you can see it is the same weeping figure. Given that this is the cathedral's main altar, it makes it clear that this figure must have been important to the cathedral's original beliefs. But who is this weeping figure? Is she a god associated with the original pantheon, or an unknown figure? In Loki's article on the Deep, he suggests that this goddess is Katha, one introduced in Dark Souls 2 and one that's heavily associated with Karim and the Tearstone rings. Katha is known as the goddess of tears, something we learn via the red Tearstone ring from Dark Souls 2.
I should clarify, she's associated with Karim as of Dark Souls 3. She had no association with Karim in the original game. Obviously, she was never mentioned. Dark Souls 2 obviously makes no obvious association with her. It's only with the more recent events in Dark Souls 3 Maybe this happened concurrent with some of the events in Dark Souls 2 or before then in the wake of Dark Souls 1. Possible, but at the very least we have to say in the period since Dark Souls 2 is when she really starts becoming associated with Karim for certain. So again, this relates to Katha's true identity, of course, as Velka, but like obviously there's a lot more going into this, but I think yes, Smough's making the underlying point here. Katha's just logical. There's no other god that's really associated with weeping here like we see here. There's no other god that's really associated with cleansing through her weeping and stuff like we again see with Katha with the old sorcery from New Londo that's been now converted into a miracle from Dark Souls 2 and been adopted into Katha stuff by Dark Souls 3 for sure. So like there's a lot of interesting connections to be drawn there. Yeah, totally not anyone we already know.
Katha, goddess of tears, mourns the undeserving dead, shedding tears as red as blood. It is said that the stone set in this ring is one such tear. Thus, we can see why Loki believes that the statues found in the cathedral are those of Katha, as they depict a weeping woman. But let us also explain how Katha is associated with Karim and the Way of White. In the original game, there was no mention of Katha in the tear stone ring item description. Instead, the ring's description tells us that it is from Karim. Yet in Dark Souls 2, they are described as relics of Katha, and so the rings become a bridge of connection between Karim and Katha. And this is a connection which is more overtly expressed.
Okay, the thing is, as shown there, is that these are clearly two different rings. Again, I don't disagree with him that you see a bridge of connection, but I think it's a bridge of connection that only really gets made in the post Dark Souls 1 era. Again, some people may look at this as like, oh, they're trying to retroactively add Katha to the lore. No, because at the same time that they're introducing Katha, they're completely omitting Velka. It becomes obvious why, because, well, Katha's replaced Velka as the god of that patron deity of that country, right? I don't even know if you would describe her as a patron deity, right? More so she was operating that country. Now Katha's the one operating that country. And obviously the events involving Katha and Morn have completely changed the culture in Karim since the original game, where obviously it was not a country of clerics. Obviously he had Arstor still alive and he had no connection with the churches or anything. Like, obviously, I think the way Smough's looking at this is a little backwards, but I understand why. I did not help him on this stuff, by the way, because I didn't realize he was going to be going so deep into Katha here.
In Dark Souls 3. In Dark Souls 3, we meet Aegon, a knight from Karim who's the guardian
Yeah, Katha's got a lot of funny little connections. Like I said, Dark Souls 2 makes it very obvious, the Velka-Katha connection, right? Though it's admittedly, you can consider it somewhat more subtle. But Dark Souls 3, like, it just builds upon it and kind of runs away with it. That's honestly the story of Dark Souls 3 in general. It takes a lot of the subtleties in Dark Souls 1, 2, and either makes it explicit or just kind of runs away to make it, like, so goddamn obvious. I'm looking at you, Shira.
A saint tied to the Way of White religion. Aegon wears the Morn set, a set made to replicate the armor of the original knight called Morn, who was the Archbishop of Karim's apostle. The Archbishop, of course,
Morn, the castle, arena,
being a position within the Way of White, and knights from Karim such as Aegon follow his example, serving and protecting a singular maiden, as he once served a singular goddess, Katha. Katha and Morn are now important figures to the Way of White in Karim. Their relationship is mirrored by Way of White maidens and their protectors, of which Irina and
it's referred to in the biz as a rebrand. Yeah, it is.
Aegon are an example of. Katha seems to be a figure who weeps for those who do not deserve their suffering. Additionally, her miracles, such as caressing tears, involve cleansing people from poison and—
Jeez, that miracle looks like something familiar. A certain sorcery of a certain class of, you could say, clerics almost, who were related to a certain patron deity of a certain country that fell to the dark. I wonder who I could be talking about.
And other afflictions. With that in mind, it makes a lot of sense that Katha would be the patron of the cathedral, as she is someone who weeps for those who are afflicted through none of their own fault, but is also a goddess who is associated with cleansing powers. In short, Morn and Katha became important figures to the Way of White in Karim, and thus it is very plausible that Katha became a mainstay figure in the church worldwide. Large tangent done, I would agree with Loki's suggestion that the figure depicted here is likely Katha, and this cathedral is one dedicated to her specifically, as an important member of the Way of White pantheon. So I think we now have a fairly clear picture of the cathedral's original purpose, as it was when it was first built. The Deep was once seen as a holy and peaceful place, and it was potentially used as some sort of holy spring. The patron of this cathedral was seemingly Katha, which makes sense given her association with tears. But the peaceful purpose of the cathedral wouldn't last, as the nature of the Deep would change over time, and would need to be contained. And so before we go any further, we need to explain what the Deep actually is. As we noted before, the description of Deep protection tells us that the Deep was once pure and peaceful, sacred even. Yet it eventually became host to a whole host of horrors. As I will discuss in this chapter, I believe that the Deep became corrupt over time due to the stagnation of the world. I believe that the Deep is a further manifestation of the dark, much as the Abyss is, a watery metaphysical abyss that exists along the fabric of our world. Yet it is a body of cosmic water that became stagnant and infested over time, as the natural cycle of the world was denied through the continual linking of the flame. The idea that the deep is a manifestation of the dark makes sense for a number of reasons. First, the thematic allusion between it and the abyss of Dark Souls should be readily apparent, as the abyss is also another term used for the depths of the ocean. The abyss of the sea is also pitch black, with no light reaching its deepest reaches, and so it is thematically fitting that the dark would manifest as a deep metaphysical ocean.
Yeah, this is a very important point that Smough's making, is that when we're talking about the abyss, we're talking about the abyss in the context of like an ocean, typically speaking. This idea that, you are talking about the abyss of the sea. It's part of the reason that the dark has such a lot of water connotations or associations with it. But again, in this context especially, the idea of the deep is referring to the idea of the deep or the depths of the ocean, right? Where, of course, the light does not reach, right? So it's talking about how there's this even, a darker than dark type of idea here, and it's because by the stagnation.
In my video on the deep from many years ago, I compared the concept of the deep to various real-world religious beliefs, from which I believe the deep draws its inspiration, such as the weighing of the soul by Anubis, in which the sin of man causes a soul to become heavier. I mentioned earlier how the abyss and the deep are almost certainly linked, not just because they are both obviously forces associated with the dark, but because there is a semantic link between abyss and deep water. Abzu, the Sumerian myth of the distant sea, is often interpreted as a sort of cosmic water that ran beneath the surface of the earth. This is how I envisage the deep within the world of Dark Souls, a sort of rising tide of stagnation that sits alongside or beneath the surface of reality. This is why we can have the Merkman manifesting from its depths.
Well, again, this is because the abyss is itself settled at the bottom in the Dread Keep. So like this is something where it's like, again, Smough, I did not send any references for Smough on the stuff like Third Beginning and things like that. So a lot of the cosmological stuff I had no involvement with, but it does sort of trying to get to this idea that yes, the deep is a cosmological force, but it's not the type of cosmological force where it's like this omnipresent, always existing thing. It is something which has developed from the result of the fire linking. It's something that will become this great larger force as the world continues to inevitably approach its end and this stagnation continues during that.
From the ground at the Dread Keep.
Night Rain especially renders the dark as very way. Yeah. Though I can't speak to all the stuff related to the Murk and night and the night and Night Rain and all that stuff. But there is this very deep association between the idea of the sky, the cosmos, the sea, bodies of water, flowing water, rivers, all that stuff. That's all associated with the night sky and stuff like that. So yeah, that's definitely fair.
This is a stagnant force that is only building as time goes by, which is why the deep has physically breached the world at certain points. The abyssal swamp at the Ringed City, the growing corruption found at the Cathedral of the Deep.
Okay, the abyssal swamp in the Ringed City isn't deep. The game makes it abundantly clear. It's all dark, but it's not deep quite yet. And again, I get why Smough is tackling it this way, but I feel like maybe I should have sent him stuff on the Third Beginning so he can have a better thing, because I do cover this in my Aldrich article, but obviously I don't explain everything. But maybe I should have insisted he look at some of that stuff to help get a better idea of like the framework of what we're working on here, because it's not something that I feel like he's getting to the point that he's like talking about it as like something more omnipresent or like always exists. It's like, no, that's not really quite it. There is a sense that the dark always has existed beneath reality, in the sense that the entire world is surrounded by the globe, I should say, is surrounded by a body of water, which is the cosmic sea in the sky, very similar to Bloodborne or Elden Ring or something like that. But that's a separate discussion, and it's more so running in parallel to what the dark and the deep is, rather than being like the true source of it or something.
And of course, that original spring of water upon which the cathedral was founded. We can see these as real-world breaches of this metaphysical dark power.
Yeah, I disagree with this. I think there's two ways to look at this. One, it's just that the spring happens to show up. There's another interpretation where you could say it's actually the holy spring of Marah that was brought over with the drift, and Marah itself as a country has collapsed, so nothing else of relevance was brought over. Like maybe the rest of anything else would just be ruins and they're like buried in the earth or something here, which is another argument, sure. But I think it's similar to the holy tree that Midir ends up destroying related to the gods. I think we just have to kind of accept that there are a lot of things that are possible in Dark Souls, and I think Dark Souls 2 does actually a good job of kind of displaying this, where there are a lot of things that kind of can just happen in Dark Souls. Strange evolutions, strange random events that are we can just chalk up to the happenstance of disparity. Why did we get a pool that happened to be able to retain a high degree of holiness, which is essentially a derivative of the power of sunlight and stuff like that? Probably a mixture of local geological factors and the power of disparity in souls. could just happen to be like a bunch of trees around here. The souls bled over into the pool waters. It retains all that. It gathered some sunlight as that shined over every day, and eventually, by the random chance, those souls ended up developing a light element bent, or a light bent, I should say, and as a result, ended up creating this area of dense holiness compared to, say, any other body of water. It could be something as simple as that. Again, I know that might not be the most satisfactory answer to have, but it's one that seems to be very consistent across the games, and that we just have a lot of different random events and stuff, and there's not like some big narrative significance or reason for them. I don't agree with this breach idea. I think he's missing the forest from the trees here in terms of why do we have those, for lack of a better word, portals of abyss cropping up in the ash piles throughout Dragkeep versus, which is far in the future compared to here. You could argue that Katha's role as mourning the undeserving and her miracles further prove Velka due to Velka's role in forgiveness and mercy. Oh yeah, sure. There's a lot of obvious parallels and connections to be drawn between Velka and Katha for sure. Like like you could make tons of them like that in terms of their roles, their characters. It's obvious that they're supposed to be the same people ultimately. Miyazaki's becoming very direct and very mysterious at the same time, showing the dark as clear water relay, but still hiding damn cutscenes from main game. So yeah, that's the thing with Miyazaki, is that he's someone who's always made a point that he doesn't want to give away too much. But it's very clear, at least in the case of sequels, he does feel like he has to at least give away some stuff, or at the very, if nothing else, then because he needs that stuff to be clear. So that way the next mysterious quote unquote points he makes can be a little bit more, require a bit more effort from the player to comprehend, right? I think that's fair as well, because it gives people some answers to questions they may or may not have been able to answer when they were playing the games originally, and then it allows him also to build upon that with new quote unquote mysteries that for the fans to have to find out and stuff like that. So again, I've always been appreciative of Miyazaki's storytelling. The only problem I would probably say is I feel like over time Miyazaki's become maybe due to weariness just a little bit too much trying to bend on giving the player more than is necessary, really. Again, this is the separate discussion on Elden Ring and some of the exposition heavy stuff. Again, I understand a little bit there because he's a little biased with like, oh no, I have Martin stuff and I have to share more of Martin's things and yada yada yada.
Beneath the world of Dark Souls, a dark tide is rising, a deep aquatic realm.
By the way, I just want to say we're only 30 minutes through. I am pausing this so much to chat with you guys, so sorry about that, but we'll get through this.
Dark things exist. For even though the deep is a metaphysical power, it is actually a water-based realm. We could see this illustrated in the physical manifestations of the deep I just mentioned, which are of course bodies of water. But it is also illustrated by the weapons of the Merkmen, which are described to us as being damp. The actual character models of the Merkmen further illustrate the aquatic nature of the deep. As if you look closely at their bodies, you can see that barnacles and mussels cling to their body, as if they have long been submerged in the deep sea. We will talk more about the Merkmen soon, but for now just understand that these are beings that rise from the deep, and they are evidence that while the deep is a cosmic force, it also does behave as a real-world sea would. That is essentially my thesis of what the deep is. It is inherently a nebulous concept to grasp. As the Deep Gem says, it is a realm beyond human understanding. So
it's not okay. It's beyond human it's beyond human understanding so far as like you can't actually use intelligence or actually I think even faith, if I recall correctly, to use deep weapons and stuff like that. So that's a bit of a mechanical thing. But as far as like the lore is concerned, yes, it is a deep that man has not been familiar with, a dark the man has not been familiar with up until then. Doggo's like, what are you doing? Why aren't you paying attention to me? Oh boy, 1 second, chat. This dog does not want to leave the bed. She just wants to stare at me and then complain that I'm not paying attention to her as she stares at me menacingly. All right, we're moving on.
I just wanted to make my overall concept of the deep clear before we dive into the more granular details.
No, okay, so to get point to now that Smough's finished this, so my general thing is I think Smough's a bit off here. I think he's weighing too hard into the metaphysical aspect here. The idea of the deep is very simple. There's the dark. If the dark stagnates, like anything else in the dark, the setting of Dark Souls 3 is stagnating, it will eventually change and transform with properties that we have been otherwise unfamiliar with up until now. In the case of the deep, it is essentially can be easily and simply defined as stagnant dark. And this term of the deep is taken or borrowed from the holy pool that existed. And this holy pool, which was used for cleansing and of course had holy power, ends up being corrupted because there's this idea in the deep of deep souls, i.e. you take, say, the white souls, right? The non-dark souls, right? And those then become corrupted by the dark until they are breaking down, you could say cannibalized, to the point that these souls end up becoming assimilated into the stagnant dark and becoming their own kind of pseudo-humanity. And eventually they will just become another aspect of the dark. This is already stuff that humanity does effectively, right? As we were talking about with the dark sign earlier. So this is not something that is that unfamiliar. Oh, she's so cute. She's so cute. She's licking me. She's licking me now. Oh my god, this dog is so adorable. Just gotta ignore her, Chad, and she comes straight to you. That's how you get all the ladies. People for years. Deep is another dimension. Loki, it's a pool, a big, very dangerous pool. Yeah, that's effectively what it is. It's a simple idea. You had this thing that you called the deep. It was basically a big deep pool. It was holy. It was wonderful. You could hurl your undead in there, and hey, maybe they'll be cleansed of their undeath. Most likely, they're just gonna die, and then you're gonna have to bury them. Oh well. Send in the next guy. Okay, then you send really big corrupted guy called Aldrich, who is effectively already a kind of a dark, at least, abomination, but definitely like sort of a deep abomination at this point already. He's corrupting now the holiness, and that holiness is being subsumed by the corrupted dark. That is now the deep has become this awful thing with all associated with all this evil, dark, corrupted stuff. All right, now we're growing and we're becoming a cult. What are we going to call this metaphysical, stagnant, dark force that we are? Okay, let's call it the deep of the pool, because that's what we're already basically doing. Like, it's just it's a natural evolution of being like holy pool, corrupted pool, the corruption itself, right? This reminds me of a concept from Shinto. Yeah, I wonder what it is.
With that said, let us talk about the deep's evolution from a sacred place of peace to a
We'll
roiling
never
sea of
escape
corruption.
Acers,
As I discussed
Kagare.
earlier, the deep was once a peaceful place, and that also makes sense in the context of it being a manifestation of the dark. While we often think of the chaotic and destructive elements of the dark, it can also be seen as a comforting and quiet place. Indeed, this may well be its natural state, and it has only become corrupted due to its stagnation. Consider how peaceful it is.
No, again, I think Smough is missing it completely off the mark here. He's completely missing. The point is that it was holy and sacred. The way of white is not worshiping the dark as holy and sacred. I'm sorry, that's just not happening. You can make an argument, maybe, oh, but Katha is there, and Katha's here. It's like, no. It's very obvious that it's about holiness and holy power and the worship of fire and everything there from the cathedral of the deep itself. So regardless of, Katha's association of it thanks to the water and the cleansing and the dying aspect, it's got nothing to do with, any of that going on here, what we're talking about. What's most important to be talked about is the fact that it was this holy pool, and of course the fact that after Aldrich gets imprisoned here, it becomes corrupted and gives rise to terrible things. Because again, if it was always this, why didn't these things appear earlier? Important question you'd have to ask yourself then in this scenario. As always I say, you have to run the scenario and see if this really makes sense.
Inside the abyss when you are not fighting the four kings. There is nothing, no sound, no life. It is an empty piece. I also find the end of fire to be similarly peaceful, as the light slowly fades and a dark finality falls upon the land. Not with an apocalyptic bang.
Not even a dark finality. That's kind of the point. So Smough, I think you should listen to what the Firekeeper's saying one more time.
But a silent and comforting whisper. This is a concept more overtly explored in Dark Souls 2, with the fall of Drangleic. In a dialogue, the spirit of the King's Chancellor explains to us the influence that Nashandra had over the kingdom.
The Queen brought peace to this land, and to her king, a peace so deep, it was like the dark.
Again, this much is true. There is definitely a tranquility associated with the dark and stuff like that, but that has nothing to do with the deep of the holy pool we're talking about here.
So Nashandra, child of Manus and a creature of dark, brings a deep calm to Drangleic due to the influence of the dark that she brings. What I'm trying to illustrate is that often the dark is seen as something calming and peaceful. And I think this is an aspect of the dark's nature that is often overlooked, especially when we focus on its more destructive elements. In short...
Well, again, the destructive elements tend to be a result of the user. It's natural innate greed when in association with things that are not of itself. I guess you could even argue itself in some contexts. But most importantly, because it tends to be that the power is being... what's the word? Expressed in the form of the mad. And madness is inherently erratic, chaotic, disorderly, destructive, right? Like that's what it is. You don't want to meet a lunatic on a bus with a knife, right? Like you kind of know how that's going to end up for you most likely. The same thing here. Like you don't want to be with someone using the dark when they're kind of crazy, such as Manus. Like it's not going to end well. I've seen people say that Drang Lake was sold by the Abyss because of the statement of Welliger and using somehow the Drang set as evidence for that. Yeah, that's all manners. Again, the point with the point that Welliger's making is to kind of foreshadow that, oh, hey, Nishadra turns out to be a dark monster. Wow. It's almost like we see that at the end of the game when she reveals herself. It's like, ah, man. Turns out that she was some dark abomination. Look at the giant horror jump scare spider in the cathedral. Yeah, very calm and tranquil. All right, let's keep going.
I believe that the deep is a separate manifestation of the dark, a metaphysical body of water that was once a place of peace, but that over time...
Again, I agree with him on this point. Again, I just think he's too deep in the sauce here. He's looking at this the wrong way, but he's got the right idea, but he's looking at this from the wrong angle.
...has become wild and corrupted as a result of the world's stagnation. Stagnation caused by the linking of the fire, and the repeated denial of the natural course of the world. And I believe that the body of water that's found at the Cathedral of the Deep, the spring upon which it was founded, is but one manifestation of the deep. And when it was first discovered, it was still a peaceful place, as the dark can be. The church then viewed these waters as something sacred, cleansing. Yet over time, it has become corrupt.
Again, it's really hard when they actually have even like fire and like the sun on like the back of their robes and things like that. The entire point of the red is supposed to represent the first flame. Like if all this stuff, you'd be like, oh no, but they saw like this deep shadowy pool and they were like, hey, you know, that looks calm and peaceful. Let's worship that. Again, wrong thing. You're getting the timelines mixed up. The reverence occurs after the Aldrich is imprisoned there and becomes part of the problem.
Due to the stagnation of the dark within it. To try and unpack this complex cosmic force, let us start with the human dregs, the key offering in the Aldrich faithful. Its description reads as follows: proof of a duty fulfilled by the Aldrich faithful, who patiently await the devourer of God's return. Dregs are the heaviest things within the human body, and will sink to the lowest depths imaginable, where they become the shackles that bind this world. Given the similarity that this object has to humanity, my suggestion is that these are traces of humanity, traces of the dark soul that have stagnated, and have sunk to the bottom of the deep abyss.
Yep,
I find the original Japanese description of the human dregs to be even more illuminating, as it describes the human dregs as the stagnation of humanity. Very much in line with what I'm suggesting. In short, the human dreg is humanity, but that which has been removed from the body and left to stagnate and sink to the bottom of the deep's abyss. This connection to stagnation is further expanded upon by the description of the great deep soul, a sorcery derived from the deep itself. It reads as follows: Archdeacon MacDonald, a sorcerer himself, delighted in the cathedral's stagnating souls. For him, they represented the glorious bedrock of this world. This tells us that the deep became full of this...
Again, keep in mind, for MacDonald, he's talking specifically in the terms of the white souls and stuff like this. So this is part of the idea of the dark consuming, subsuming the light, and that becoming in itself part of the deep, right? So the little, obviously, slightly different context with what MacDonald's talking about, which we see expressed in the sorcery of deep souls and stuff. Obviously, compared to the ultimate deep soul, where it basically becomes... almost like the humanity dregs that we see. So it's like we're getting there, but we're not quite there at that level yet. But again, general point I think is fine.
Stagnating humanity, all of which sank and gathered at its bedrock, stagnating over time. It is easy to see how such an environment would breed horrors over time, as this is the dark growing corrupt and more dangerous over time.
Yes, true. And what was the catalyst for those horrors to emerge because of the corruption? Aldrich. Aldrich, or Eldritch, whichever name you prefer. Personally, I prefer the localization name because I'm tired of playing my Japanese games and reading just English words and Japanese people acting like they're so cool, novel, and foreign sounding. It's like, no, cool, novel, and foreign sounding to me is like Solaire, because that sounds like solar, but not actually being solar. Okay, moving on.
Past games, we have seen the danger that the dark can represent when it goes wild. By the time of Dark Souls 3, the repeated relinking of the flame beyond its natural cycle has caused the dark within humanity to further stagnate and strengthen. This is why we witness the likes of the Pus of Man, sentient masses of aggressive humanity that take the form of a dark serpent.
Yeah, this is, again, the Pus of Man, of course, do emerge in the Ring City much earlier in the timeline, obviously pre-Dark Souls 1 stuff. But yeah, it's the same idea, is that, yes, these this stagnation of man is part of the stagnation of the world is part of the reason stuff like the Pus is continuing to grow as like the powers of flame are getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and the dark is growing stronger and stronger and stronger as like events kind of prolong, even with the fire linking happening. Like, it's not changing the overall trajectory of the world, it's just gradually slowing it to a crawl. And again, that's part of the reason why Londor is trying to slow it even to a crawl of a crawl.
This seems to be an affliction born from man himself, born from the humanity within him, a symptom of the dark that has grown due to the stagnation of the world, and the denial of the dark's natural state.
Yep.
Fun fact, the ulcerated tree spirits from Elden Ring were actually originally created for Dark Souls 3, but cut before the final game launch. They were going to be massive Pus of Man variants, and I am actually really sad they never made it into the base game.
Well, okay, specifically, it was going to be part of the Gundyr boss fight. So just to be clear for Smough, because I'm sure he didn't look too deeply into this, but again, I cover this in my Puss of Man stuff, and with Gundyr, of course, this was what Elden Ring was originally adapting from. It was taking this idea of a Gundyr boss, which mechanically was actually going to be very similar to Lawrence. Now, keep in mind, this Dark Souls 3 like early production stuff was happening concurrent with Bloodborne's DLC's production, right? So Miyazaki's working on both at the same time. So yeah, kind of makes sense when he finalized the idea for Lawrence. He's like, okay, yeah, I don't want us to repeat this again for Dark Souls 3. And they ended up just scrapping the whole concept and everything. But it's a very interesting kind of parallels to be drawn there with this idea of like kind of like this corrupt black snake spirit that is emerging from man, and it was going to become this giant boss fight, which as we see was probably going to be, you could easily see just retexturing all the effects and the actual model of the ulcerated tree spirit, and how that would just basically be a different type of Puss of Man, you know. Bro, if you ever played Baroque, that cool because it's an English word thing is so prevalent. I have not, so I'm not familiar with that.
With creatures such
but
as
I can imagine it's such a it happens a lot in Japanese games
and birth similarly horrifying creatures. The cultural relevance of stagnation should also be very apparent for those who are frequent viewers of this channel, but nonetheless, we will revisit the subject briefly. FromSoft is, of course, a Japanese developer, and thus is steeped in Japanese cultural references. A common recurring motif in Elden Ring and the Souls games is that of stagnant water, which is a representation of corruption, both of spirit and the body. In Shinto, flowing water represents purity and life. Conversely, stagnant water is representative of death and impurities, no doubt a belief drawn from the fact that flowing water is clean and pure, whereas stagnant pools of water are breeding grounds for parasites and bacteria.
Good, he brought it up.
This concept is known as Kigari, a state of spiritual impurity, caused by death, disease, and other taboos.
Kigari,
Kigari is seen as analogous to stagnant water that grows filthy, while purity is represented by flowing clean water. This is why, in my opinion, Godwyn takes on an aquatic form in Elden Ring. He is stuck in a state of perpetual soul death. This is an impure state of being, and his form is an allusion to the Shinto belief surrounding stagnant water.
Yeah, again, there may be more to it within the actual setting and world of Elden Ring, but yes, if we're going to talk thematically, that's obviously what's going on there. Why is Godwyn some mermaid? Because there's always this association with water in terms of corruption, especially, specifically the idea of stagnant water versus flowing water, which can be used as cleansing, just ablution, like all these different concepts that we would associate with cleansing, right? So it just makes sense. Even like take the Shinto element out of it. What do you cleanse things with typically? Water, right? Water's always had this purifying association with it, right? Now, obviously, for Miyazaki especially, there's this strong cultural connection to these concepts and stuff, but it's not so foreign that I don't think we can completely understand this idea of, oh, there are things that are filthy. We take literal filth, we apply it in a spiritual sense, and just like that, we could take literal cleansing and apply it as well in a spiritual sense. And in this case, what do you cleanse filth with? Water. What do you cleanse corruption, uncleanliness with? Water.
In relation to Dark Souls 3, this entry in the franchise largely focuses on how the world has stagnated after repeated linking cycles. The Age of Fire was meant to end long ago, and the Age of the Dark was meant to take its place. However, the former has been artificially extended thanks to Lord Gwyn and those who follow in his footsteps in linking the fire. By Dark Souls 3, we quite clearly see the consequences of this unnatural state of affairs. The physics of the world has started to break, with cities from various ages literally being pulled towards the first flame, a spatial and temporal vortex that has formed around the kiln, the fabric of reality itself churning and breaking, due to the repeated linking of the fire. These are symptoms of a world pushed to the brink, a world that has been held in stasis against its will. The stagnation of humankind is a symptom of a wider stagnation.
1 second, the dog's barking again. Maybe she wants to go outside. All right, we'll see how long that lasts. Yeah. The cough, giant lake of rot, cough, of the swamps in every damn game.
That is afflicting the world as a whole, brought about by the unnatural linking of the fire, an act that has prevented the world from completing its natural cycle. Thus, it has been stagnating in stasis ever since Gwyn's first linking of the flame. This is cosmic stagnation, the flow of natural progression being halted, and the world has started to rot as a result. The same concept is explored.
We're not even an hour in this yet, so we got a lot to go.
In which the painted world has persisted long beyond what it should and has started to rot as a result. It must be burned down so something new can replace it. In many ways, it is a microcosm of Dark Souls 3's main themes. This world has existed too long.
No, yeah, it's abundantly clear. the Dark Souls 3 DLC is used as a microcosm, as a reflection, to be like, look at this from an outsider's perspective of what everybody is doing and how stupid it is. So like this is Miyazaki trying to make it abundantly clear to everyone. Like it's like this whole thing with the Dark Souls games, it ain't working, champ. We gotta end this series now, please, for the love of all that is unholy. Wait, start.
Begun to rot.
There we go.
Because the dark is denied its natural cycle, it is stagnating. It has become like a cancer, metastasizing and spreading in chaotic and destructive ways. The deep is just one of the dark's manifestations that has transformed, as the world has, changing from a pure body of water to a corrupt, stagnant abyss that is now full of parasites and corruption. One of the more literal illustrations of the world's stagnant nature. I believe that as time passed, and humanity stagnated into the human dregs, these sank into the metaphysical deep, and this stagnant deep would breed all sorts of horrors. Just as Kigari is...
No, because the stagnant humanity is itself the deep. Again, this is the problem with Smough like tried to create this separate dimensional space called the deep, when that's not really what we're getting at least not until like the very end. We're getting something approaching that with Dark Souls, with the Dread Keep in 3. So it's like it's more so the idea that, again, you already have the stagnant dark of humanity. This is the thing that will quote unquote sink, right? It's not sinking to an actual ocean. It's there, we pick it up and stuff. But the way it's acting and behaving works in the context of a metaphorical abyss, which is what the manifestations of the dark overall is. And the point is that, you know, if just as the abyss is a manifestation of the dark, so is, you know, this sort of the stagnant abysses we see in the form of Aldrich, in the form of what we see in the Dread Keep with the ashes and things like that. These are essentially just the deep equivalent of the abyss, and not even fully, right? Because we still see regular abyss stuff. It's all connected, right? It's more so like he said earlier, a cancer. It's slowly spreading to consume the dark the longer that the dark is left to stagnate, right? So eventually, barring any other changes, it will all become the deep anyway, right? Now, again, we kind of avert that by the events of Dark Souls 3 and the various, well, at least the Londor ending seems to help avert that. But again, we don't know for sure how things would shake out unless there's another game. And again, the entire point of Dark Souls 3 is to be like, there should be no more games. Please don't make us make one no more games.
Associated with parasites, so too would the deep become home to various dangerous beings. Something we learned from the Miracle Knob, which reads as follows.
Nick makes a good point here. It felt to me that like the story's redundancy was the impetus of the third game's existence as a whole. It was made out of spite. LOL. I don't think it was made out of spite. Miyazaki himself has gone on record to say how much he actually does enjoy working on sequels in terms of different, because obviously he's taking, it's no longer him trying to craft a new world with new ideas and completely new characters and stuff like that. It's him taking that existing world and figure out how to build upon it and take these concepts that he had from the first game and develop them to their logical conclusions and things like that. So again, I think it's more so that Miyazaki is very much interested in sort of, you know, developing and resolving, you know, all the hanging threads from his original game, because there were stuff on the narrative and thematic side that you could definitely have explored more. Not that you needed to, but that you could. And that that's why I think that's where he creates Dark Souls 3 from. But yeah, there's definitely this point that yes, the Dark Souls series is by its nature impossible to have sequels without the redundancy, because for whatever reason, Miyazaki is obsessed with having every Dark Souls title revolve around the question of leaking in the fire. And because of that, you can't really get away from the point, the futility and pointlessness of the fire linking system itself. It was something that Dark Souls 1 kind of left there for fans themselves to discover, and you could have the debate about, oh, you know, whether or not Frampt is telling the truth. Was it really going to end the undead curse? Does that really make sense? Is it actually that everything was going to work out fine if we just did the fire linking that one time? And what was going to happen on the dark end or whatever like that? What are the implications of what Katha said? You know, these would have been the debates of where the games would be if there were never any sequels to kind of affirm. But once you get the affirmation, nah, the undead curse is back, there's like, well, what's the point? That was the whole idea. It's a one and done. My one sacrifice was going to be able to save the entire world for the purpose of ending the undead curse, but it doesn't even do that. Like, at most, you could maybe argue, oh, well, maybe it delayed it for a little bit. Again, it doesn't really pan out the way we look at it and just logically how it functions, but that would be the idea. It's like, that doesn't really work. He said himself he does have a preference, though you could look at their track record lately. You could mistake him for or that he doesn't have a preference, though you could look at their track record lately. You could mistake him for like, I think the problem is that it is so complicated for Miyazaki to make sequels for a lot of his games because you need to work with the publisher. You need him to be completely free and available for him to be directing and concepting it. You need all the time to actually go through and figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? What type of game is it going to be or whatever? I think for him, it's just a lot easier with all the projects that he's already been had. He had obviously Bloodborne is his own thing. Then obviously Elden Ring with Martin was a huge time sink for him. Then you have like little smaller projects like Derasine, which are kind of the more experimental, going their own thing. And now he wants to do something multiplayer with that. It's like, these are not things that necessarily lend themselves to sequels, right? Maybe spin-offs, like say what we get with Night Rain, but as Miyazaki's at this point in Miyazaki's life, he also wants to try to diversify it so he's not the one that's carrying the entire company. So like I think it's just a matter of like I think it's just a matter of circumstance that Miyazaki's just never been in a position where he has the space to work on a sequel for one of the existing games where everything, like all the stars have aligned, everything's worked out where he could do that, and where he's in a headspace where he would want to because he has like all these new ideas or all this new references that he can really go into explore. I would love for him to do that next, and maybe, who knows, maybe he already is, but I just don't think, I think it's just been one of these things where there's always a new idea and it's better off being its own new series, especially when you're working with a new publisher or something. Like you can't do a sequel to Demon Souls if you have to do it on the Nintendo console, right? And he doesn't want to do what he did with Dark Souls, I think, where he creates a spiritual successor, because then that creates the, like, he himself made a joke of how he keeps on saying, you know, souls, because for those that don't know, spiritual successor is literally you saying in Japanese the soul of something, so it's like, oh, it's the soul of Demon Souls or whatever. And he made even jokes then. He's like, he keeps talking about souls constantly. I think in many ways he's kind of sick of that idea where he's kind of recycling stuff in order to kind of make something feel like it's a continuation of something else in some way. But he really would rather just, you know, completely break free and kind of make his own thing, and whatever similarities they are, it goes into the giant smorgasbord that is From Software influences and self-referential stuff. So I think it's just that they're super successful. They're already conceptualizing new ideas before they finish a product and think, hey, that this would work. Hey, we should work on a sequel. Yeah, I think it's just the circumstances just don't allow it. I think that, yeah, like you said, there's the success angle of the different games they're working on. There's the different consoles and publishers and things that they're working with and stuff like that. Again, there's been talk about the idea that maybe From Software is the one themselves that have shot down a sequel. I don't know how ready I am to believe it unless From Software themselves ever comment on this, just because the it just sounds like one of those things that you tell your developers, like, oh no, we really want to do this project you have, but you know, the other guy said no. So, you know, it's one of those polite ways of letting you down easy, you know. But who knows? But either way, I think that for From Software, it's just the matter of, like, you know, sequels have just not been in the cards. But I don't think that Miyazaki hates the Dark Souls franchise or the fact that it has sequels and stuff like that. I think he's happy if his games are popular enough that people would want more of them and stuff like that. I think it's just a matter of, you know, Dark Souls 3, I think, was the one time he's able to do it. And in the context of Dark Souls, it was a game that was never really designed with sequels in mind, right? Like, it wasn't even designed with DLC in mind, as we know. Like, the DLC had to get greenlit after the fact. It was one of those things that was meant to tell its own complete total story. It did that, and anything else was kind of extra. And so if he's going to tell a sequel that's going to try to develop and, like, you know, kind of wrap things up, then he really wanted to wrap things up and kind of highlight the, you know what, you know, there really shouldn't be more of this. It's time now for us to kind of close the book, right?
Dark miracle taught in the Cathedral of the Deep summons an insect swarm to feast on foes. These insects, which lurk in the deep, have tiny jaws lined with fangs to tear open the skin and burrow into the flesh in the blink of an eye, causing intense bleeding. Additionally, maggots also seem to have an association with the deep. This is quite clear by the presence of the maggot golems and the infected undead that we can witness at the Cathedral of the Deep. Additionally,
is golems really the localization name of this? I've never heard this before. I've never heard this one before. Like, okay, that's new to me. I don't ever remember them being called golems.
Loki points out that in a cut version of his fight, Aldrich would have been supported by maggot men in his fight. Maggots, insects, beings often associated with decay, death, and stagnation. Fitting then that these...
Again, I would like Smough to have highlighted this. The maggots are in Aldrich's body and in his boss room. Like, it's not okay. You had the maggot men who would support you in the fight, sure. So you'd have Rosaria as like little guys there, but like, it's not just them.
creatures seem to fester within the deep. As I will discuss shortly, I also believe that the abyssal swamp of the Ring City is a further manifestation of the deep, and the creatures that inhabit this swamp are the Locust Men. Again, the association with the deep, stagnation, and pests is illustrated by these creatures.
Again, it's clearly just the dark and the abyss. We don't find any deep gems or anything. If they really want to associate with the deep, you would find deep gems there. You don't. It's just regular ass dark. I'm sorry, Smough. I think you're off base on this. The dark has always been associated with spontaneous generation, like what we see with the locusts. I've talked about the stuff with Alvina and the cats in Irithyll, or Dark Regard, I guess I should say. The same thing that we have with the wandering, the vagrant spirits in Dark Souls 1 and stuff like that, with the little crab fungal souls. So this is nothing new.
Abyssal swamp being associated with the deep isn't too far-fetched a theory. The swamp is clearly a manifestation of the dark at the very least. Swamps are also often symbolic of decay, rot, filth, and disease, and as such I see the abyssal swamp as an advanced manifestation of the deep. Another interesting piece of lore found in the Ring City DLC can be found in the Dreadkeep, where the forces of the deep are present. Here we can find the Merkmen, phantasmal beings that rise from the ground, that have a connection to the deep. This connection is explained to us by the description of Great Soul Dregs. Its description reads as follows: a sorcery that fires great dark soul dregs that have stewed for ages, far within the deep. This sorcery is a high form of deep soul.
Can I just say I love the editing for this video, by the way. I think Smough's editing has always been pretty top-notch, but I don't know, something about this one and how he's done the transitions and stuff with the text and everything, I don't know, it's been really, what's the word? Smooth. I really enjoy it a lot, so congrats to him on the quality here.
Some of the Merkmen who rise from the depths are possessed by soul dregs, which have a grave likeness to the human form. The Merkmen are those crawling enemies that we can find within the Dreadkeep, and according to the Great Soul Dreg, these are beings that are possessed by the soul dregs that are found within the deep. The fact that the deep's power is manifesting here at the Dreadkeep, far away from the Cathedral of the Deep, shows that the pool of water at the Cathedral is not the only instance of the deep. As I stated at the beginning of this chapter, I believe that pool is just one localized manifestation of it, but it is clearly a metaphysical power that exists along the skin of reality, manifesting in areas of dense corruption. Even if you disagree that the abyssal swamp is a manifestation of the deep, at the very least we have to see it as evidence of the dark stagnation in general.
In a sense, yes, I agree with that in terms of the broader point of the stagnation. So I think I think that's fair there. That I think he's right there. It is a point about the larger stagnation. I think the crystallization of stuff kind of highlights that as well and stuff on a thematic level. But it's not the deep. It could become the deep in the future after it's been freed from the stasis, stagnation that Billionor has created in here. But no, it's not the deep. This is sort of the again. I think Smough is he's so hyper focused on the idea of the deep and the metaphysical stuff. I think he's looked at this at the wrong angle. He's completely ignoring the larger context of what's going on in the Ring City and the way that some of this stuff that overlaps with Billionor and things kind of grinds against this notion he really wants to put in here. If I remember well, locusts are good insects in Japanese culture, while maggots, flies, and deeper layer are very bad insects. I'm actually not too familiar with maggots and flies. I kind of understand because of corpses and stuff. That's always I've understood to be constituted kagare. I'm not sure about locusts. I'd have to actually ask around and look into that more because I actually don't know about that. Maggots and flies, though, I could see it just by association of a lot of stuff that is considered corruption in Japanese culture, often related to dead bodies and things of that sort. Which obviously maggots and flies are huge, are deeply associated with that. Typically though, it'll be stuff like centipedes, which are the big representation of stuff like Kegare, which is why you see them so often in From Software titles and things, right? Maggots and stuff also I think are kind of ancillary by comparison, but ultimately it's all related to this idea of corruption and filth and stuff like that. So
area that is so saturated with the stagnant dark that it takes on a more swamp-like appearance, fitting given swamps are bodies of stagnant water. And bear in mind, there is another location associated with the dark that has a swamp present, Farron's Keep. Indeed, the floor of the cathedral is flooded with a swamp similar to that of the abyssal swamp, again suggesting that the dark can manifest in this way if left to stagnate over time. The dark denies...
This is not an abyssal swamp in the deep. This is a corpse swamp. All the corpse bodies and the stuff. Now, it isn't a poison swamp yet, from what I recall. That isn't poisoned yet, but it's the same idea of filth and nastiness and corpses and stuff is polluting the waters in that cathedral. And the swamp, the swamp in Farron Keep is various things, though obviously the corpses aren't helping much. So again, if I knew Smough was going to cover this, I would have given a few more references and reading materials. I would have actually, I probably for something like Faron, I would have just grabbed an excerpt, because it's not that you don't need to read all of Faron to understand what's going on there. But yeah, I think he's locked in too hard, Chad. I think he's locked in. He's on like the road, and he's like speeding like, oh, he's like going like 100 miles over the speed limit, and he ain't able to steer this thing.
Its natural ascension has begun to fester and corrupt the physical plane in other ways. This potential future is actually mentioned in Aldrich's soul, which reads as follows. When Aldrich ruminated on the fading of the fire, it inspired visions of a coming age of the deep sea.
Guys, look, there's Gwendolyn. Look, guys, Gwendolyn's in this picture.
He knew the path would be arduous, but he had no fear. He would devour the gods himself. To me, this age of the deep would be one of dark, but one that results from a build-up, and then flooding of the world with the power of the deep. A deluge that would sweep the world up in a deep, watery abyss.
Well, yes, because that's naturally where the world is going, right? Like, it's not hard to see the stagnation and what the stagnation affects on the dark, and then extrapolate that to what happens when the age of dark eventually comes after all this stagnation of keeping the current age of fire alive instead of immediately ending it, right? And ending the stagnation with it, right? Like, this is the problem. this is the issue that Aldrich has chanced upon and realized, being like, oh, the world is gonna kind of head this way if it keeps on going in this direction, and then guess what? I'm gonna be the biggest force of deep affinity there, and I can effectively become the king of this new world.
It is a karmic response to the constant relinking of the flame, a manifestation of the dark's power that is building up as the world stagnates before it releases, in a deluge to wipe the flame from the earth.
I don't know. The ending seems a little frantic to me. I mean, it's at two times speed, so I think you guys have to judge it separate from that. Just to keep in mind, I'm listening to it a little faster than most, or what it's intended. I don't want it full screen. There we go.
Final thing to note about the deep and its corrupted nature is that it can seemingly pass its corruption onto those who come into contact with it.
Yeah, sure.
We spoke about the deep's connection to spiritual corruption and Kigari, so it's fitting.
I mean, this is just a continuation of what the Abyss does, so like this is nothing new.
That the deep can warp.
Again, there's the greedy element. I wonder if he's gonna touch on some of the stuff I talk about in the deep about its greed and the petrification, but
soul. For example, if we look at the souls of both the Deacons of the Deep and Aldrich, we can see that they've taken on a unique bluish hue, no doubt representing their connection to the deep. The deep is such an impure force that it has the power to warp, distort, and corrupt the very soul of people. This is fitting given what we discussed about Kigari, and the deep's symbolic allusions to this.
Again, it's the similar idea to like what happens when you mix different colors. You know, you mix what is it, like orange? Oh, if you mix like orange and black, it becomes brown. If you mix the dark with light, or at least a neutral white soul, it's going to have this polluted blue, right? Dark blue, or light, even, strands of light blue, but basically blue coloration to it, right? And then as that corruption of the deep soul becomes deeper, and the blue becomes like the purple stuff we see, and it slowly but surely it eventually becomes its own essentially humanity. It becomes like that stagnant purple humanity soul that we see, of course. So
concept.
I know, I'm joking. I figured you were, Xavier, but I just wanted to clarify for everyone just in case.
As Kigari is a corruption that can spread to others by mere contact. That is, someone can be considered spiritually impure by coming into contact with death, even if they aren't to blame. As I will suggest later, I believe that Rosaria's own soul has been afflicted by the deep due to her contact with Aldrich, which would very much be in line with the deep's interaction with soul.
Obviously, I agree with this, but I would have to clarify that there is the unique angle with Rosaria where it's not exactly the same as the other deep corruption we see. She's obviously just looking at her soul, a unique case.
Another facet to consider is the school of spells known as Deep Soul, a set of spells developed by MacDonald, drawing on souls found within the deep. The item description from Great Deep Soul is packed with useful information, and it reads as follows. Sorcery which improves upon Deep Soul, fires powerful darkened soul dregs. Archdeacon MacDonald, a sorcerer himself, delighted in the cathedral's stagnating souls. For him, they represented the glorious bedrock of this world. So these are not human dregs, these are soul dregs. The former are stagnant humanity, whereas these soul dregs seem to be souls that have been corrupted by their contact with the deep. There are three versions of this spell: Deep Soul, Great Soul, and Great Soul Dregs. We could see these three spells as a sort of progression, a progression of soul corruption that results in the Great Soul Dregs, this final spell very much looking like a humanity sprite, akin to the Pursuer's spell. So what is happening here? Well, it suggests that the dark corruption found within the deep is so intense that it is transforming the soul itself into something akin to humanity. To quote Loki from his article on the deep, this still implies that there is a dark which is consuming all the light of souls it engulfs. Indeed, Dark Soul Dregs have a pursuing nature akin to living humanity, and Great Soul Dregs shows humanity to be their ultimate form. If anything, this corruption of soul shows how impure and oppressive the deep is, that it will warp the soul of anyone who comes into prolonged contact with it.
Again, this is not unlike how the dark acts. Obviously, the thing with the deep is just that it's become stagnant and in some ways more dangerous, more aggressive in many ways. It's not exclusive. This danger isn't exclusive between the deep and the dark. For example, we see Pus of Man also inflict petrification, like we see with some of the deep stuff. But obviously, there is clearly the idea that the stagnation of the dark is creating a new kind of abyss, which we have not been familiar with up until now, which behaves similarly, but not exactly the same in all aspects as the standard dark.
Loki is correct, then the deep is converting stagnating souls into something that is akin to humanity, or is actually humanity. This has quite terrifying implications. As with each soul converted, the power of the dark soul increases, as does the power of the deep. This is of course—
Again, this is the same implications you could apply, though, to humanity itself. Humanity also devours souls, and those souls essentially are adding more to the humanity, and eventually, theoretically, every soul will essentially become consumed by the dark soul and become part of that. This is in the macro level what the Age of Dark really is, right? So,
of course, my reading of the deep, and is largely in line with what I believed for years, but given this is just my interpretation, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below and what you believe the deep is. We now have a rudimentary understanding of what the deep is, and how dangerous it can be to body and soul. With that said, let us now return to the Cathedral of the Deep in Aldrich, and we can now understand why the cathedral would become a location primarily concerned with containing the roiling corruption of the deep. I believe that Aldrich was sent here because, by that time, the cathedral had moved to stage 2 of its belief structure.
Nope. Smough, you completely missed. I figured this is what he was going to say based on what we have, but nope, we haven't hit stage 2 yet. Aldrich is the cause of stage 2. Again, I think you got this backwards. You send it to the deep because he's already the monster, and you want him cleansed. Obviously, because Sulyvahn gave him the doll, because he's like, okay, you'll get cleansed, you'll go there, you'll get cleansed, maybe it'll take some time, but it's fine, and then you can come back. That was the idea. That was the plan. Just kind of keep things quiet down, you know? I'm sending you to the branch office so you can kind of get out of the heat for a bit. Get out of the limelight. Yep. Part of the ship, part of the crew, yeah.
Where they had recognized that the deep had become dangerous, and thus needed to be contained. Aldrich comes to his new parish at the Cathedral of the Deep, likely not having any contact with it prior to this time. At this time, the cathedral would have been dedicated to containment, its halls and doors, guarded by the skilled and dangerous cathedral knights. I think that Sulyvahn viewed this as a pseudo-prison, one that could also contain Aldrich, not just the deep. Publicly, he had just reassigned Aldrich to a new parish, but in reality, he believed he had contained another threat to his church. Returning to—
Well, again, the point was to contain a threat to his church so far as, obviously, a political sense, right? But the bigger concern for Sulyvahn is like, okay, I'm just gonna get rid of this guy for a little bit, and then he's gonna come back. Like, the idea again. The doll is very key in telling us this was not meant to be a permanent imprisonment or anything like that.
Hawkwood's description of this affair, he says that Aldrich was stuck in the Cathedral of the Deep. This specific language to me suggests that he was imprisoned or exiled there, removed to a place—
It's a distillation of the worst aspects of humanity, right? Thematically, yes. Theoretically, could the deep be used by the standard forces of dark and not cause a problem? Sure, but in the context of Dark Souls and what we're getting, what we see is that much like how the deep is arguably becoming a more extreme version of the dark thanks to stagnation, the factions aligned with the deep are also becoming more extreme, right? What happens if you decide you want to take the Dark Souls 2 route and you're not going to actually make the choice and decide what path the world should take? Well, you're leaving a vacuum open that would allow people like Aldrich to fill in instead. Do you really think you would do worse than Aldrich in terms of make a world a better place for everybody? I think we can all agree that whatever world Aldrich envisions is probably going to be far worse than anything that even the most incompetent Dark Souls 3 player would be able to create, even if they were just a figurehead or something, right? Like, the point being made with Aldrich in the Deep so much is to kind of show the consequences of delaying the inevitable, and that it's just going to cause a worse backlash.
Of apparent security, where he couldn't cause any further harm. We can see that the Deep's corruption has indeed taken hold of the cathedral. Its lower floors are flooded.
I wonder how they convinced / forced a giant blob of melted meat and bones and probably shit to enter the pool. We have to keep in mind, he's a corrupt cleric, but he's still a cleric. He's still very, he obviously, whatever Aldrich's background or whatever, he was someone who came in thinking that becoming a servant of the gods was the most he could do for both himself and perhaps for the world at large. And he still has this thinking in the context of the deep, where again, everything is obviously framed to his selfish benefit, but it is still something that is being filtered through this idea of, oh, this is what is best for the world. This is what is the true future for the world. This is like, I'm on a holy mission. Like, this is my divinely appointed fate almost, right? Is that, you know, Aldrich very much has like this typical Messiah complex idea, right? It's just a Messiah, and much like many actual cults, which have these type of Messiah complexes, the cult leaders have sort of twisted or perverted where their own selfish desires, where it's very obvious from any outsider's view. It's like, okay, yeah, like this is not actually like, you know, this is not actually some noble, you know, divine mission or anything like this. This is just you kind of out for yourself and all that stuff. But in their minds, this, you know, what's good for them is what's good for the world and what's good for, you know, the larger cosmic structure that they exist within. And that's the idea, is that Aldrich, he was a corrupt cleric who indulged in cannibalism and stuff, but he was still a cleric. So he's going to obey when he's told, okay, you got to go over and basically go house arrest in here and go through a cleansing cycle. Like, he's going to go through and do all that. And he cooperates the whole time. And in the end, he ends up becoming a Lord of Cinder, which is like the pinnacle of holiness for someone in his position. So he seems like he gets off, like, you know, it almost feels like, you know, all of this, you know, selfishness, it kind of reinforces in his mind that, oh, all of this was actually for the greater good, right? You know, it was actually important. It was necessary even that I commit to this cannibalism, right? In the same way now that he sort of perverted and think about this way, where he's now abandoned the idea of fire and all that stuff and thinks that no, all this is actually part of this mission where I become now the king and the ruler of the deep, and I will guide these poor lost souls to this new tomorrow of the world. I'm the only person who can do this, right? That's the idea. That's what makes Aldrich so interesting as a character compared to others like him in From Software's catalog, but also so terrifying, is that this is a guy where he really believes his bullshit.
Maggot creatures swarm the grounds, and an endless tide of corpses rise from the graveyard. Additionally, the very foundations of the cathedral have begun to crack and sunder, and again I take these black growths to be a manifestation of the deep's surging influence. No wonder the cathedral would need to employ the cathedral knights in order to keep the site secure from visitors. Aside from the cathedral knights, other tools and practices were employed in order to stem the tide of the deep that was now seeping from the cathedral. Grave wardens were part of this new containment structure, something we learn of via their robes, which reads as follows: Rotting, tattered robe. Attire of grave wardens at the Cathedral of the Deep. Grave wardens were tasked with disposing of the ever-rising corpses that plagued the cathedral. Their clothes are utterly putrid, drenched in the blood and mucilage of their undertaking. As we can see, the wardens were employed to stem the tide of endless corpses that rose in the cathedral's graveyard, wielding their wicked blades to put these corpses down. Now you might assume that these are undead that are rising from the graves, like any other undead from the Dark Souls series. However, I do not believe that is the case. Bear in mind the wording.
No, they're not treated as hollows. Their names are corpses, not moja. Like it's very clear. It's very clear that these are not undead. Like, the game makes this abundance.
Used in the grave wardens.
These are just corpses that are effectively piloted by maggots.
Robes, where their victims are referred to as corpses. I believe that these are literally fully dead corpses that are being raised from the dead rather than the undead we find in Dark Souls. I think that these are dead bodies being possessed by deep-spawned parasites. Remember, earlier we referenced the Merkmen, those enemies found in the Dreg Heap. Ultimately, the Deep represents another form of the Dark, a manifestation of its power that is building in strength, a cataclysm which could result in the Age of the Deep. These are men possessed by soul dregs from the Deep.
We're almost at the
Thus,
hour
Deep
mark,
has the
chat.
propensity to possess
Almost.
other beings. And it seems as though something similar has happened here at the Cathedral. Rather than soul dregs being involved, however, it seems as though maggots are the creatures that are infesting and puppeteering these corpses, evident by the maggots that can burst out of their chest cavities. As we discussed earlier, maggots are almost certainly servants of the Deep, and it therefore seems that the spread of the Deep resulted in the infestation of the cathedral's graveyard. It is fitting, given that maggots are found feasting on carrion and corpses. Yet in this case, they seemingly infested these corpses and raised them up, resulting in an infestation of walking corpses. Thus, the grave wardens stalked the graveyards, putting down the constantly reviving corpses, a grim task that is reflected in their blood-stained cloaks. Further evidence of the Deep's corruption affecting the graveyard can be seen in the graves themselves. If you look closely at some of the gravestones, then you can see a sort of liquid material emanating from their base. This seems to suggest that the Deep has saturated the ground that houses these graves, explaining how the corpses came to be infected. It appears as if fire was also a tool which the cathedral employed to curtail the spreading corruption.
For sure.
As we highlighted earlier, the beliefs of those at the cathedral align with those of the Old Dynasty and the First Flame, which is why their robes are coloured red in order to hearken to their beliefs.
Which is why them revering a actual dark pool from the get-go is absurd. Like, I'm sorry, Swotan. I think this is a very huge impediment to your theory here. By the way, Loki, what are you going to talk about related to that Yahar'gul statue screenshot you DM'd me about? Okay, so yeah, so Snowbreak sent me a picture and stuff related to Biswan. I don't know how to. Yeah, Biswan's probably how you should pronounce it, or Bisine. Anyway, point is that basically I was trying to figure out where the origin of this screenshot stuff and what have you. I'm going to talk about it in the context of Loran, because in the context of sort of the way names had changed around in the old game. So for those that aren't aware, Ebrietis was originally, I think internally she still called this, she was originally going to be called Kos or Ghosts, because, you know, the idea that phantasms are ghosts, right? And she's closely related to like the phantasm slugs. So there was the idea that she was going to be the Kos that Mikolash was referencing. And we can see this reflected in the statue where, much like how Mikolash talks about how you gave like vacuous Rom, you have pictures of Ebrietis or Kos lifting up Rom in a cut statue thing. And then related to that, Flora was, or the moon presence was going to be Ebrietis. So essentially you're going to have the idea where the character with the Latin name for drunkenness was going to be associated with, of course, the moon presence, who's, well, her presence when the blood moon and stuff appears causes, you know, great blood drunkenness, the madness and stuff, you know, all that stuff related there. And then, of course, Kos, who's associated with ghosts and phantasms and stuff, was going to be, you know, the what ultimately became Ebrietis and stuff. It was going to be, obviously, that probably would have changed a lot of the context of what Mikolash's dialogue would end up being. Again, it's one of these nice things about From Software games where it's like, okay, you have the dialogue and stuff recorded, and, you know, if you don't want to cut or whatever the dialogue, you kind of just recontextualize it in a way so that way that those lines you already done are going to have new meanings and implications when the final game comes around. It's one of those interesting aspects of the narrative development process at From Software. It's also probably why we have a few mistakes in Dark Souls 3 with the final game and stuff, because that stuff gets overlooked. Generally one of the most underappreciated antagonists in the series. The complexity and reprehensible nature of his character is next level. Again, I agree. I think the best decision Miyazaki ever made was separating Sulyvahn and Aldrich into separate characters. I think that was a stroke of genius. Having them together, it would have been an okay, you know, antagonistic character in Irithyll. But separating them and what ended up, you know, resulting because of that is just 10 times more interesting. It was a stroke of genius. Full props to him for that. It was the best decision he could possibly make.
The evangelists speak of cleansing the curse before wielding fire, and thus it is likely that those of the church would have used fire to try to purge any trace of corruption. A great observation was made by Loki in which he highlighted the description of the red bug pellet, which, to be honest, I hadn't even read before. It reads as follows: medicinal pellet made from crushed insects. The red type temporarily boosts fire damage absorption. Prepared in the Cathedral of the Deep by evangelists, who dole them out to followers to ease their suffering when they burn. This outright tells us that the evangelists encouraged their followers to purge themselves with fire, though they were kind enough to give them a balm for the pain, I guess. We do indeed see this fanatical belief in play at the Cathedral of the Deep, as many of the faithful clergy will set themselves on fire and try to take us with them. The importance of fire would also likely explain why the Deacons wield fire sorceries, weaponized cleansing fire that the Deacons would wield in their containment and purification duties. It is unconventional for men of faith to wield sorcery in the world of Dark Souls, but we know that it was Archdeacon MacDonald who taught the Deacons how to wield these fire spells.
Yes.
This is something we learned from the cleric's candlestick, which reads as follows: candlestick used as both sword and catalyst, used for worship by the Deacons of the Deep. The Deacons, under the guidance of Archdeacon MacDonald, became both clergymen and sorcerers. The very fact that we have a man of faith utilising sorcery really reveals how different the way of White became under Sulyvahn, and it perhaps isn't surprising that with such flexible ideals, MacDonald and the other Deacons would become corrupted by Aldrich. However, at the time, it was likely viewed as a practical necessity, as the wielding of fire could be used to purge the spreading corruption of the dark. But the Cathedral's belief that fire could purge the dangers of the deep is why we find an abundance of fire, crucifixion, and large-scale human sacrifice at the undead settlement. This is the work of the evangelists, who have brought their puritanical practices here to cleanse mankind of the spreading dark and the deep. Here we note numerous pyres in which many humans have been ritually sacrificed, a final purification of the curse within them. Their evangelists would come here spreading the word of the cathedral, instilling the fear of the deep within the common man, and burning people on great pyres in a zealous attempt to purge the dark. Thus we can see the church had a lot of apparatus in place to contain and cleanse the corruption of the deep. And I believe the cathedral was likely at this stage in its theological evolution by the time Aldrich was exiled here. To contain such a beast, the great man-eater's appetite would need to be satiated, and thus the evangelists would develop what was known as the Road of Sacrifices.
All right, so we're going to move on to that very quickly, but I'm going to go check on the dog. 1 second, chat. All right, here we are. Oh, cleanse the bastard's curse. Yeah, I love that line. I love the delivery. It's just so perfect. Did we ever confirm who the voice actor for the evangelists are? It sounds like a woman, but I could easily imagine a man doing like a falsetto or something for that, since it's such a small part.
He suggests that this is a bit of a two birds, one stone arrangement, with the sacrifices being chosen from among those who were showing evidence that they were afflicted with the pus of man. These unfortunates would then be shipped to the cathedral under the guise of purification, when instead they were being fed to the devourer.
Again, he should be mentioning the reference I have to there. There is item descriptions that basically allude to this very fact that it's about the pus of man. But okay, like, pop off, King.
Thus, the cathedral's arrangement not only disposed of those
Like, it's not just me.
but also satiated the colossal hunger of Aldrich. The true nature of the road of sacrifice is hinted at by the large undead servants who have cages on their back and the great machetes in their hands.
Could you clear something up for me? I may be misunderstanding. There are two sects of the deep now, some pro Aldrich and some not, the Red Deacons. No. All the Deacons that are alive at this point, barring maybe one, the friendly one in the bell tower, they are all effectively as part of the deep cult. All the others have been killed. They've been purged, as it were. I guess you could say Rosaria's faction is kind of a separate thing that has persisted or whatever, but, you know, ignoring them, the actual Deacons have all basically become aligned with Aldrich. The difference is that there are those who are basically treated as kind of like higher ranking who come with Aldrich for the most part, and they wear the blue robes. Obviously, the switch out from red to blue is to highlight their status and allegiance to the deep, right? But the ones in red, such as Archdeacon Royce and stuff like that, they're still loyal. They haven't swapped out their clothes yet because they're just not the ones that have been singled out for this special mission, as it were, right? To go over as part of the god eating. But again, several of those who have swapped out, they have remained at the cathedral as like Royce's bodyguards. They are the blue ones that appear in phase 2 along with Royce when he shows up, and they act as his healers because they actually have healing miracles. Like I think it's either great heal. In order to help, you know, keep him alive and stuff like that, right? And of course they all, I don't know if they have Wrath of the Gods, but they have Force at least, right? Like, so the point with the difference between the red and blue is more so about showing who's in the inner circle right now with Aldrich. And right now, most of those who are in the inner circle have gone over with him to Irithyll, because obviously devouring the gods is Aldrich's big #1 priority. He has decided he will become an ascetic, and he's giving up his cannibalism in order to go through the terrible, terrible pangs of eating one singular god slowly to savor. Because, man, he's got to savor it, right? And then God knows, he probably would have gone to Lothric next in search of Guinevere or something. But the point is that he, you know, that is like his thing with his people there, and the rest, they're just basically keeping his coffin warm for him so he can like come back and feel at home when he wants to, when he can go back to eating bodies again, right? When he finally can end this horrible asceticism that is, you know, so he's giving up so much, Chad. I know he's giving up people so he can eat gods instead. Oh, all the humanity.
We know that these are associated with the evangelists, because we can later find a pair accompanying the evangelist on the path up to the Cathedral of the Deep. Another variant of them seems to carry a giant bowl, and combined with the machete and the cage of body parts on their back, a rather grim picture is painted. It suggests that these brutes cut up victims and prepared the resultant meat in bowls.
Anyway, again, he didn't highlight this, but the corpses in the cages that are being brought with. Like, it's very obvious that the evangelist is leading a group which is bringing some of these bodies to the cathedral to be fed to Aldrich in the future.
Bowls that would be transported and then fed to the devourer. Carriages would be transported along the road of sacrifices, filled with prisoners and butchered meat. The cathedral's...
Well, again, it should be noted that these carriages that he's showing here is related to Lothric, not related to the road of sacrifices per se. But yes, it's the same concept of that, you know, they fill them up in the carts that they do to bring to smuggle them out of, well, not really smuggle, but, you know, to exile them from Lothric, and now they are transferring them outside of the undead settlement to the Cathedral of the Deep by the road of sacrifices, which passes through Faron territory.
Resources leveraged to exploit the local populace in order to meet the demands of his grim habits, whilst also purging their congregation of what they saw as corruption. I want you to take a moment to consider the scale of this operation, a infrastructure that ran from the undead settlement all the way to the Cathedral of the Deep, operated and overseen by the cathedral's evangelists. The scale of this mass slaughter is genuinely horrifying, and who knows how many innocents were rounded up and transported to the cathedral, all so they could be sacrificed to Aldrich's gluttony. Yet all of this was likely in service.
Even worse, many of them have likely been, if not necessarily brainwashed, then at the very least sort of coerced under this idea that they're doing this for the greater good. Oh, this is going to be so good. It's very important that we satiate his will. We need to make our saint more and more powerful for the purposes of eventually making him a Lord of Cinder, right? So the whole cleansing him thing didn't work out. All right, what's the next best thing? Well, my buddy Oseros here needs another Lord of Cinder in the near future. So let's prep him up for that, right? Let's fatten him up so that way he can be powerful enough to link the flame and become part of the fire linking system. Aldrich will like that. He'll have a great divine holy mission. Oseros will be happy because he'll have someone to, keep things going until he can figure out how to fix Lothric's whole born weakness problem. Like, goddamn, why'd the boy have to be sickly? Obviously the undead settlement stuff are happy because these are undead who are wretched. Their lives are miserable. They're constantly clinging to the faith for purpose and a way out of their circumstances, and we could give them an out, right, by killing them, right? Very, very Astraea-esque, right? But unlike Astraea, who in her heart of hearts, down to the core, truly believes she's good, at some level, again, like I said, Aldrich believes is bullshit, but it's still bullshit, and he also knows it's bullshit, right? Like that's kind of the odd thing, is that you have some people who they convince themselves of lies, but at some level they still understand that these are all just their selfish, malicious wants, right?
To the Pontiff's ultimate plan in disposing of Aldrich, in which Aldrich was to be...
We Italians used to call someone very good and generous. He's a saint, I tell you, a saint. Yeah, this is you hear this in English too. It's very similar. But yeah, Aldrich is such a saint. Resist the temptation to eat people for his mission. Yeah, exactly, right. But it's the same idea. It's like, oh my God, he's such a saint.
Be fattened up, so he could eventually be offered up as a Lord of Cinder, meaning he would be burned as kindling to extend the age of fire, feeding him up, growing him...
Is there a reason one evangelist, Doris, is imprisoned in Irithyll? Yeah, because it's part of Sulyvahn's subversion of the deep cult while Aldrich is busy munching on Gwendolyn, right? It's part of what I was referencing earlier with the stuff with McDonald and Doris and his revived knights and stuff like that. I don't know if Smough is going to touch upon this here. Maybe he will, but I just kind of want to kind of say that in advance. Like, it's not like Sully and Aldrich are like joint at the hip on everything at all. Like, it's only until the very end, after Sully basically gets his ass kicked, that he's cooperating with Aldrich in any capacity.
In power, so he would have the required soul strength to link the fire. Indeed, publicly, this is likely how the Cathedral of the Deep and Sulyvahn convinced the local populace to go along with it. These sacrifices would be seen as necessary to extend the Age of Fire. Their sacrifice meant that the Holy Saint of the Deep could become a Lord of Cinder. Aldrich likely accepted this because of his ego. A Lord of Cinder is one who is perceived to be a great honour within the world of Dark Souls, putting one on the same level of renown as Gwyn himself. When Aldrich linked the flame, Sulyvahn likely breathed a sigh of relief. He had definitely dealt with a very difficult political situation. Not only had he contained the potential scandal for the Way of White, but he had also created a new saint for the church. A ceremonial casket was built in the cathedral to revere and canonise the saint, a monument to his sacrifice, and a holy site of worship to the faithful. This is how Aldrich became Saint of the Deep. Publicly, he would have been seen as a brave cleric from the Cathedral of the Deep, who sacrificed himself to contain the dark and extend the Age of Fire. In reality, he had been a monster who had turned the entire parish of the cathedral into his personal feeding grounds, growing strong enough to serve as a fitting being to fuel the first flame.
Yeah, as Sub-Zero says here, he enjoys being evil. And that's the thing. Like, he enjoys being evil, but he kind of convinces himself and everyone around him that it's in this framework of good, right? Because that's the best way for you to that's the best way to operate, right? If you could convince someone that your evil is good, if you could convince yourself that your evil is good, that makes so many things easier in how you go about your life.
Yet Sulyvahn likely didn't reckon with Aldrich returning, as later Aldrich would be awoken from his tomb by the tolling of the bells. His duty as a Lord of Cinder required him to sit upon his...
Again, not to make this any connection to anything in real world, but just imagine here in bedroll concept, it's like, I don't want to have to murder you all. I don't want to have to murder you all. It's really awful and like kind of feels morally dubious to do this. But my religion says that all heretics must die. So it's like, oh well, you're a heretic, so that means you can die. I have to kill you now. Sorry, like I just gotta, right? Like, it completely sidesteps any sort of deep ethical discussion, right, within the moral framework about why the context, the idea of the idea of the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law, all these things. It just reduces it to simple diktat, right? And that leaves a very easy room, not just in obviously religious spheres, but also of course in secular spheres. How many people abuse the law for their own purposes, right? In order to get out of trouble or something, right? Like, it's very easy when you can be able to justify everything you're doing by just saying, oh, the rules say it's I have to. It's the right thing to do, right?
Throne so that the next Lord of Cinder could rise. Yet instead he would abandon his duty and return to Irithyll to bring about the Age of the Deep. Aldrich would not be the stepping stone to someone else's glory, and he had instead dreamed of a new era, the era of the Deep, and he would be its herald.
Again, this is after he returns from Lothric as a Lord of Cinder to the cathedral, right? We have to keep in mind, this is a very important point, is that this is after kind of seeing, again, in the context that Aldrich is awoken in an emergency situation that should only be happening when things are really, really bad. Like, things are going really, really badly. That is the context of which Aldrich is now ruminating and thinking, you know what, maybe this whole Lord of Cinder, Age of Fire thing isn't what it's cracked up to be. You know, maybe we should do this Age of the Deep instead. That sounds a lot more, you know, up my alley.
Yet before we move on to Aldrich's reawakening, we do also need to discuss another character who was imprisoned here at the same time as Aldrich. That character is Rosaria, the mother of rebirth, a character whose story is a tragic tale of suffering and exploitation. By the time we meet Rosaria, she seems to be in control of her own sect.
All right, we're over the hour mark, chat. We got another 48 minutes. Let's see if we can do this.
Her following is very loyal and includes her Fingers, a band of invading agents, as well as her devoted mangrubs. She even seems to have drawn one of the 3 archdeacons of the cathedral to her cause, Klimt, who alone has chosen to serve Rosaria instead of Aldrich. Yet the environmental details make it clear that she was once a prisoner here. In her room, we see that her bed, upon which she is seated, is placed behind prison bars, suggesting that she was originally imprisoned here. But for what purpose? And who is she? Unfortunately, the visual evidence of her cell suggests a grim reason behind her imprisonment here, but let us get to that shortly, and first determine who she actually is. The answer seems to come from her soul, which can be obtained from Ringfinger Leonhard, after he kills her and brings it to Anor Londo. The soul can be used to create the miracle Bountiful Sunlight, a miracle which is associated with Guinevere. In Dark Souls 1, this miracle was also used to confirm the identity of the Pizzaka, tortured beings created by Seath the Scaleless, at the height of his madness. It is fair to assume that these miracles drop from the Pizzaka to help the player identify these creatures, whose identity would otherwise be a mystery. Thus, it is fair to assume that in Dark Souls 3, the miracle is being used in the same way, so that we might determine Rosaria's true identity. The miracle suggests that she is in some way related to Guinevere, a point further emphasized by the fact that Leonhard takes her soul to Guinevere's old throne room. It's possible that Rosaria is one of her handmaidens, like the Pizzaka are, but I personally believe that she is directly related to Guinevere. Her appearance is very much like Guinevere. She is almost like a dark version or inversion of the princess.
I don't think this is a good argument to be had, generally speaking, but let's hear what else he has to say.
Image we meet in Dark Souls 1. Indeed, we know that Rosaria is revered as a goddess by her followers thanks to the Pale Tongue item description, which reads as follows. Claiming tongues as trophies was originally the practice of an infamous troop of invaders, who offered them to their speechless goddess. Of course, any being can be considered a god in the world of Dark Souls, but I personally think that Rosaria being a goddess makes it all the more likely that she is from the original pantheon. That is, that she is a child of Guinevere. Whether she is a daughter of Guinevere or a more distant relation is up to your own personal speculation, but I do personally believe she is a daughter of Guinevere. In Dark Souls 1, we learned that Guinevere had abandoned Anor Londo, alongside her husband, the flame god Flann. Yet Rosaria's presence here suggests that Guinevere eventually returned to Anor Londo. In a future video, I would like to cover the full story of Guinevere, as it is somewhat complex when it comes to her departure in Dark Souls 1 and her return in Dark Souls 3, where she seemingly also became the Queen of Lothric. But for this video, it is enough to recognize that she returned to this region for a time, and thus her offspring are
Yes, please, Smough, I'm begging you. Do a Guinevere video. Let my vain little goddess who keeps on running away from all her problems have her time in the spotlight. Oh, I would love it. Oh, I want us to go over the beautiful fucked up marriage that is her and Seath. Oh my god, I would be so overjoyed to help Smough on every single level of that video. Oh, just the Shira stuff alone would be a delight. Anyway, moving on.
Also present in the story. So if Rosaria was a daughter of Guinevere, and thus a member of the royal family present at Anor Londo, how did she end up imprisoned in the Cathedral of the Deep? Well, given what we have discussed already regarding Sulyvahn and Aldrich's imprisonment, I think it is fair to assume that Sulyvahn was also the one who directed Rosaria's imprisonment. As I will discuss shortly, I believe it is likely that Sulyvahn imprisoned Gwyndolin, many years before Aldrich would devour him, and that Sulyvahn did this to secure his control over the Way of White. Prior to this, Gwyndolin and any of the remaining gods, like Rosaria, would have been at the top of the Way of White's power structure. With Gwyndolin and any other gods detained, Sulyvahn would rule the church with no further challenge.
Again, I'm not sure if Smough is aware, because I don't think anything I sent him was about this, but yes, it's important to understand Gwyndolin is the Allfather. He is the king of the gods. When Sulyvahn has him imprisoned, he is acting as the Allfather's representative on Earth, the Pope, right? In the same way that, you know, the idea of the Pope of Roman Catholicism is the Vicar of Christ, right? Like, he is supposed to be God's representative on Earth as the Bishop of Rome, right? So this entire notion, right, of Guinevere and Rosaria and all these gods being at the top. Yeah, it's because they're part of the old royalty, and that old royalty is currently arranged in a pyramid with Gwyndolin at the pinnacle. So when Sulyvahn speaks, he is speaking with the authority of Gwyndolin. That is what's important to keep in mind. So Sulyvahn could we see Sulyvahn is able to take one of Guinevere's daughters and turn her into his personal dancer seemingly for just the point of humiliating her, for the point of highlighting that he is the one in control here. Same thing with Rosaria. He could just send her off to become Aldrich's sex slave. Oops, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Because, you know, he says so, right? Like, that is what he thinks is best.
The Dancer of the Boreal Valley also appears to have been a member of the royal family, who was neutralized by Sulyvahn, as she has been transformed into one of the Pontiff's Outrider Knights, essentially a slave to his will. Aldrich, Gwyndolin, the Dancer, and Rosaria, these are all political opponents, and we see a pattern in his behaviour as to how he deals with such challenges. He imprisons them. Gwendolyn was imprisoned in Anor Londo, the dancer was broken, and I believe that Rosaria was removed to the Cathedral of the Deep. In part, this will have been to remove a potential challenge to his rule, but it also appears to have been to satiate Aldrich's darker desires. This brings us back to Anri and Horus, two characters who are seeking vengeance against the Man-Eater. But for what? Well, we get an answer from Horus's armor set, the Executioner set, which reads as follows. The original owner was said to be a corrupt executioner, who was killed and stripped of his armor. Horus is one of only 2 children to escape Aldrich's clutches. This explains that both Anri and Horus were once meant to be offered to Aldrich, but that they both escaped. The language used here suggests that there were many such children who were gathered and offered up to Aldrich. However, if you think it couldn't be any worse, then you would be wrong, as the original Japanese description for the Executioner set reveals the following. Horus is one of Aldrich's children, and one of the only 2 still alive. So Anri and Horus aren't just any children, they are Aldrich's children, his own progeny that he was presumably eating. So where do his children come from, and how many were there? Well, unfortunately that is where we come back to Rosaria, a woman who has been imprisoned in bed.
Oh god, so that was the best way to that was the best way to transition it. Well, unfortunately, we gotta go back to Rosaria now. Oh, yeah, you see the shot and you're like, oh, yeah, I get it. I get where Aldrich was having his baby factory. Oh god.
A room that is full of children's cots. The conclusions we can draw here are incredibly dark. For anyone still in the dark, the environmental details seem to suggest that Rosaria was imprisoned here, so that Aldrich could breed an endless supply of children with her. These children would be reared and then fed to Aldrich when they were deemed ready, an endless supply of self-sustaining food, and Rosaria was the victim of this macabre arrangement. Imprisoned here for God knows how long, and it appears as though she was attended to by Archdeacon Klimt. This is something we learn from the Archdeacon set, in the description of the skirt, which reads as follows. Of the 3 Archdeacons of the Deep, one attended to Rosaria, mother of rebirth, whom he deemed a goddess.
Again, it should be noted, this is about him abandoning the faith in order to become and serve her instead. So it's not like he was just always attending to her. Again, I don't think he was always around. Obviously, he's an archdeacon. He's obviously has this important role and stuff there. But like, there's the 1,000-yard stare for Rosaria right now. But the entire idea with like Klimt and all that stuff seems to be more so like he's around, he's doing his stuff, defending against the Deep or whatever. But he's also aware of what's going on with Rosaria. It's disgusting. And once Aldrich's out of the picture and everything else, eventually he decides to abandon. He gets sick enough. He abandons his faith and is there to comfort her and stuff. Probably specifically after Horus and Henry, end up. He's probably going to go over it, but basically end up escaping the cathedral and everything.
We know that this Archdeacon was specifically Klimt, thanks to Rosaria's finger covenant item, which reads as follows. Sacred seal of Archdeacon Klimt, who served Rosaria, mother of rebirth. Rosaria's fingers collect tongues in her name. Some do it to be reborn. Others do it to help comfort their voiceless goddess. Klimt oversaw her as part of his duties, but eventually would abandon his faith to serve Rosaria, with his seal becoming the covenant symbol for her faith. It is unsurprising that Rosaria is now being associated with and has powers over rebirth, given the brutal treatment she received, in which she was essentially used for her ability to give birth. This abuse could well have shaped and warped her original soul, especially since it was at the hands of a dark being such as Aldrich, resulting in her new powers of rebirth.
Yeah, I'm sorry, whatever intercourse is happening between Sludge Monster and Rosaria, I don't want to imagine what type of lingering corruption seeped in there. I'm just saying. Like, I think we all know that there is no way that did not leave a permanent mark on her one way or the other.
Birth, abilities born of the corruption of the Deep. Further evidence that Rosaria's powers of rebirth are tied to the Deep is illustrated by the Mangrubs. These are creations of Rosaria, and yet they share similar attacks to the maggot-based enemies of the cathedral, mainly through their attacks, where they spit maggots. As we have discussed, maggots are clearly tied to the Deep and its power, thus these Mangrubs are further extensions of its power. Rosaria, once a god of the Anor Londo dynasty, has been corrupted by the Deep thanks to the predations of Aldrich. Aldrich's defilement of Rosaria is hinted at by Leonhard's dialogue, after he has stolen her soul and fled to Anor Londo. During our conflict with him, he says the following. Well, never expected to see you here. Felt sorry for the poor thing in all her festering glory, and now you want to ravage her soul as well. I sowed the seeds. I'll prune the mess. I, Leonhard, swear so upon my vows to the goddess. No one will despoil her soul, certainly no beast wrapped in human skin. What do you want with her soul? Isn't flesh enough for a sick beast? There's a fair bit of reading between the lines to be done here. The use of the term as well in this sentence suggests that everything else about her has been ravaged. I think he is alluding to the fact that her physical form has been ravaged and despoiled by another, by Aldrich, and that as a result, Leonhard seeks to preserve her soul, which he sees as the last unspoiled part of her that remains. I think he's implying that he is fully aware of how her physical form has been despoiled and mistreated by Aldrich. He is protective of her, paranoid about us causing her harm, because he knows of the harm she has already suffered at the hands of others, namely Aldrich, and that Leonhard has killed her and taken her soul out of loyalty, to preserve that which remains of the original Rosaria. In general, Rosaria's dark aesthetic seems to portray the fact that she is a goddess of the old royalty, but one corrupted by the Deep, and it makes Aldrich's defilement of her even more sinister. Earlier I mentioned that Rosaria looks like a dark reflection of Guinevere, perhaps an aesthetic choice to hint at her parentage, but perhaps it goes deeper than that. Perhaps Rosaria's powers over rebirth are also a sort of inversion of her mother's domain as a goddess. The description of bountiful sunlight states that Guinevere is revered as a mother and a wife, perhaps suggesting that she is a goddess of fertility. This is a common position held by goddesses in a pantheon, such as Hera.
Again, it should be understood that whenever Guinevere is referred to as a goddess of fertility, it's like about abundance, plenty, good harvest. I translate this as good harvest in Dark Souls specifically, but it's the same term used for the age of plenty, age of abundance in Elden Ring. Again, this idea of like a cornucopia, right? You know, just having this abundant amount of food and things that we can eat and enjoy, and plant life and all that association, which is why she has such a big, strong nature association with like the color green and with plants and with birds and animals and all that stuff. And of course, people with grain and things. So like, again, she's not a fertility goddess in that sense. Of course, you could always make the argument that indirectly there is that connection, because historically, for goddesses of a lot of harvest goddesses also would end up bridging over into the fertility sphere when it came to childbirth. So again, not saying it's like wholly, you can't wholly make the connection there, but it's a little bit more tenuous than say how the localization might present it.
Wife of Zeus, who is also celebrated as a goddess of marriage, women, childbirth, and fertility. If Guinevere is thus the goddess of birth and fertility, perhaps Rosaria's role of the goddess of rebirth is a perversion of this ideal. A dark reflection brought about by...
Do you agree that Guinevere was the queen of Lothric and married Osseros and gave birth to Lothric, Lori, and Gertrude Osla? Oh yeah, I got to just check my article on Guinevere, link in the description to my website. Like, yeah, of course, like, that is exactly what I would argue.
The corruption of the deep. In short, I believe that Aldrich's corruption seeped into Rosaria, granting her her powers of rebirth but turning her into a being more associated with the deep and the dark than the light of her royal lineage. Returning to Horus and Anri, we know from the Executioner's armor that these two escaped the clutches of their vile father and the cathedral, and that they were the only children to do so. But how? Well, the answer may well be found in Horus's armor set, which apparently once belonged to a corrupt executioner. And interestingly, the executioner's sword can be found in the cathedral's...
Keep in mind, this type of corrupt is more so in the case of being like debaucherous, just basically a man with no scruples. This was just a very ruthless, moralist, unethical executioner. He would not have problem killing a young man and woman, right? So let's say that by the time Aldrich becomes a Lord of Cinder, that Horus and Anri are maybe teenagers, right? They're about fully grown, right? Maybe they have a little bit more room to grow, but they're about where they're at already. He would not be like, oh, these innocent kids who've never known a world outside. Yeah, I'll take them out back and behead them. I got no problem with that.
Graveyard, suggesting that this...
Also, Dark Souls 3 is seriously my favorite Souls game because it uses Eldritch themes and horror so well. I'll keep you a medieval setting. Yeah, I think the Bloodborne influences, while they're very obvious, especially if you're familiar with Bloodborne and its lore, you could definitely tell like Miyazaki had blood on the mind after finishing that game, but he was able to incorporate it in a way that still is cohesive with the image of Dark Souls as a setting, and I really do appreciate that because it allowed him to kind of build upon and address certain aspects of the world, which you could argue were not the focus, right? I wouldn't say they were completely, I would say they were not developed, but they were underdeveloped in comparison to other aspects that he was focused on with Dark Souls 1. And when he comes back in 3, he's able to develop these more because he's gone through those aspects through the lens of Bloodborne already.
Body is the original owner of Horus's armor set, killed here in the graveyard. In his article on Rosaria, Loki suggests that this executioner was one who was employed at the cathedral, and that Horus overpowered and killed him.
I should say that they brought him in and hired him. I don't think it's like, oh, they just had this executioner around. No, I think they brought him in from outside. I think that's the point being made, is that they weren't going to do it themselves, the cowards. So they got some guy who they could do it for him. And this is just, again, you should know this is actually very common historically. Not everyone had a local executioner in their town or village. Sometimes you had to call the executioner from somewhere else because, you know, that place had more crime historically or whatever, or that was just a better place geographically for them to perform executions. And you would call him basically in the same way that you might call any other person out of their field over to a field office so they can do their job over there. And then they would go back to the main office branch, right? Like that seems to be the idea. It's conducive with history, and it just logically makes sense in this context.
Perhaps this executioner was responsible for killing Aldrich's children when the time came, so that they could be butchered and prepared for the man-eater's meals. It seems plausible then.
I'll be honest, I think the children were probably eaten. I think Horus and Anri just lucked out and they managed to survive for so long. I think because it's specifically Aldrich and the man-eater that they focus on. It's very clear that the idea is that Aldrich already ate probably all the others. Is this the bloodborne of the Dark Soul? I guess so. I guess it is the bloodborne of the Dark Soul. All right, let's keep going.
That when Horus and Anri's time came, Horus killed the executioner, took his armor, and then escaped with Anri. This instinct to protect others may well explain his association with the Blue Sentinels, drawn towards them, given that they are a covenant focused on protecting the weak. And perhaps he and Anri focused on being sentinels for a period of time, only returning to hunt Aldrich when they learned he had returned as a Lord of Cinder. By the time we come to the Cathedral of the Deep, Rosaria is no longer imprisoned. In fact, she is running her own covenant, and is protected by her man-grub followers. It is likely that following Aldrich's linking of the fire and subsequent burial, she was probably freed from her imprisonment, likely by Klimt. Klimt abandoned the way of white, and he chose not to serve Aldrich. Presumably having attended Rosaria all throughout her suffering at the hands of Aldrich, felt a loyalty to her, and thus would become a leading member of her followers.
Again, I disagree. I think just based on his focus on as a holy warrior and stuff, he probably wasn't attending to Rosaria. He probably was just, you know, and as his role as a archbishop, he was probably just, you know, going around leading the defense and the protection against the deep and all that stuff. And then Rosaria, you know, he's there, he sees it, he's not able to do anything about it because that's not his role, that's not his position, not his authority or any of that stuff, but he knew, he understood, and that eats away at you, you know? Like McDonald, Royce is clearly just weak-willed. McDonald is clearly just another psycho like Aldrich, right? He's a corrupt cleric in the same vein, on following Sulyvahn's orders. But Klimt seems to be like this outsider who has a good heart and good soul, and he wants to, you know, he wants to follow the chain of command, but at some point it becomes too much for him. Because how can anyone stand by and let what happened to Rosaria happen? He certainly wants to make up for that.
As we have discussed already, Rosaria's association with and powers over rebirth makes sense, given the pollution of her soul by Aldrich and her relationship to birth. However, one other aspect of her covenant still needs to be explained: her finger invaders, and her obsession with tongues. The answer to this comes to us from the Obscuring Ring, a covenant reward from the Finger's Covenant. Its description reads as follows. It is said that Rosaria, the mother of rebirth, was robbed of her tongue by her firstborn, and has been waiting for their return ever since. So the fact that this ring states that Rosaria has been waiting for their return suggests that her firstborn child is still alive. And as we have seen from Horace's armour set, Anri and Horace were the only two of Aldrich's children who survived, making it likely that one of these two tore her tongue out. As for why, we never get a motivation, but Loki does make a couple of suggestions in his article that it could have been an act born of pity or spite. But regardless, it is a final act of defilement that Rosaria clearly places high importance on. Rosaria has suffered greatly at the hands of Aldrich the monster, and now her own children, and it is thus little surprise that Rosaria now employs a cadre of invaders to spread suffering to others. Rosaria's acts are born out of bitterness, towards a world which has offered her nothing but pain. Her fingers seem to be so named, as together all of these fingers form her metaphorical hand, her agents through which she can inflict pain upon the world. The fingers all seem to be the successors of the Dark Wraiths in many ways, with the red-eye orb of the Dark Wraiths being the source of their invasions, but repurposed to serve Rosaria. Indeed,
it should be noticed that Dark Wraiths themselves actually are at least many of the ones we encounter are operating as Rosaria's fingers. Just want to point that out. There's one exception with the Dark Wraith in Lothric Castle, because you're supposed to get him for the red eye orb, but he respawns, and then he respawns with the same loot table as all the other Dark Wraiths in Far and Keep, so it kind of makes things a little awkward, despite the fact he's supposed to have been in prison far longer than they have. So it's a bit weirder there, but you know, you get the idea.
Dark Wraith Kirk, now one of her fingers, was the original invader who stole the power of the Dark Wraiths for another purpose. In Dark Souls 1, he used these powers to bring humanity to the Fair Lady, rather than to Katha, and now he once again uses the tools of the Dark Wraiths to serve another mistress. Kirk serving Rosaria certainly fits what we know about him. He wants to bring comfort to women who have been wronged in one way or another. Rosaria's story is a brutal and tragic one. An innocent who was taken and defiled by the most horrifying evil imaginable, abused by Aldrich the Church, and then by her own children. It is little wonder
Miyazaki call a psychologist. Again, I appreciate Miyazaki for being able to very tastefully handle very dark and disgusting subjects. I think it's obviously it sort of lends naturally to the type of storytelling he engages in, but I think it is still something where it's like, you know, we can get into very dark subjects dealing with, you know, cannibalism, rape, tons of different, not so nice things, and able to handle in a way that isn't necessarily graphic, right? You're able to have so many disgusting things, but it's oftentimes done as much by suggestion, right? And I think this goes along with what Miyazaki often says, where he tends to prefer having elegant designs, right? He doesn't always like stuff to be like Aldrich with the with all the oozing, muddy, very like visceral, disgusting nature of everything. He likes stuff to be a little bit more cleaner as he would imagine it. And I think that comes across very well in his storytelling in general. Is it odd Henri and Horace are unkindled? Like, if I hate my dad and my dad was a Lord of Sidra, I'd rather not want to follow in that footstep, or maybe they want to fight his action. Again, this is connected to Londor Sub-Zero, so this is it's a little outside of the scope of this, but yeah, basically Horace and Henri are acting on wanting revenge on Aldrich, and becoming unkindled is essentially part of that larger revenge plan that is facilitating the goals of Londor, who are backing them, right? They are hollows of Londor, effectively, and they are as Londor is using them as much as they're using Londor to get to what their specific goal is, which isn't, of course, linking the flame. Horace and Henri will just say that for the sake of not blowing their cover, and as we see, she drops that when they get so close to their mission. Like, it's no longer about being a fireless ash. It's about doing the mission of seeking the kings of kindling. It's about her, making up for all the brothers brothers and sisters she saw get devoured, taken and devoured by that man-eater, while she's left there to survive for God knows what reason. That you gotta imagine the survivor's guilt she has. Why was it me? Why was it them and not me, right? Why am I the one that has to live with this, right? I find it funny that Diz forgot to adjust the drop for the Dark Wraith at Lothric Highwall and just had him drop over. Yeah, that's my point, no, Bray. It's like the first time I get it, like, right? Like you want him to guarantee the Red Eye Orb and that's it. But then when they respawn, it's like, really? You didn't think to either make him where he doesn't respawn or he just doesn't give you anything, so you have to like, it's funny, you know. There's always gonna be those little oversights where you're like, wait, that doesn't really make much sense.
That her mindset is quite vengeful following.
Hey guys, maybe that particular Dark Wraith just had a thing for tongues, you know? Like, everybody needs a hobby, chat. Sometimes, you know, you just go around and you're like invading, you're sucking the souls out of people, but you're like, you know what? I want a physical trophy, you know, something to remember this person I killed by. And you're like, their tongue. It's only natural. I'll just cut this off and no one will notice. They won't even notice and they'll realize it's me, because who the hell checks inside the mouth for tongue? They'll just throw the body into the grave. It's perfect.
Imprisonment, directing her followers to rip the tongues out of others, so that they might experience the same pain she has. Additionally, she will only offer rebirth to those who present her with a tongue, showing that she will only reward those who have inflicted pain upon others. Rosaria's gift of rebirth is not just a result of her association with birth, but perhaps a reflection of her own tortured mindset. Rosaria has gone through the worst torture imaginable, and it wouldn't be surprising that she herself would want to be reborn. Reborn so that she was not the same woman who suffered at the hands of Aldrich. She's been given a callous and merciless view
I think
of
it's a
her
good
own
way
life
to frame
and
it.
the lives of others. This is why she will continually rebirth her followers until they become man-grubs. It portrays Rosaria as a goddess, with a cynical view of life, seeing no problem with reducing her followers to such a state. Rosaria is ultimately just one further victim of Aldrich, as are Anri and Horus. Horus is sadly doomed to fall in the catacombs of Carthus. However, Anri is able to gain her revenge, should you choose to assist her. In helping her strike down Aldrich, you avenge Anri, Horus, and Rosaria herself. To be honest, there's more I could have said about Rosaria. Her story is a fascinating one, with more symbolism, tragedy, and details that I could have expanded upon. She is one of my favourite characters in the whole series, and the Fingers have always been a personal favourite covenant of mine. With that said, I would highly recommend Loki's article on Rosaria. In my opinion, it is one of his best, and he covered every single aspect of her lore. I believe it was upon his awakening that Aldrich truly embraced his vision to bring about an Age of the Deep.
Yep.
And it was at this stage that the Deacons of the Deep would pledge loyalty to Aldrich and his religion of the Deep. At this stage, Aldrich was determined to devour the gods in order to bring about this terrifying future, a dark deluge that would wash away the world. The cult of the Aldrich faithful formed within the cathedral and effectively took it over, with both Archdeacon Royce and MacDonald being among the foremost of Aldrich's worshippers. I find it interesting that some deacons, including MacDonald, have a new deep blue robe, no doubt marking them out as Deacons of the Deep, rather than one of the Way of White. An interesting thing to note is that there is a clear difference between the deacons in the purple gown and those in the red. The ones in the purple are showing signs of deep corruption, with growths coming out their eyes and from below their gowns. These growths very much look like the strands that we see on Aldrich's body.
Yep.
Thus we can assume that they are a sign of corruption, caused by exposure to the deep. This corruption is notably absent from the red robe variants. This can tell us something about the structure of the Deacons of the Deep. Those in purple clearly have a stronger connection to the deep, and I would suggest that they are among the more zealous members of the Aldrich cult.
Yep.
Perhaps those who, alongside MacDonald, were the first to worship the deep and Aldrich. They have a greater knowledge of the deep than their red-robed compatriots, and likely have been believers for longer than the regular red-robed converts, hence their more advanced corruption.
I don't know about that, but at the very least, they've deepened their faith much more than the others, right? And again, like I said, this is about status. This is ultimately what it's about. Who are the ones that are within the inner circle? Who are the ones who have proven themselves to be worthy of coming with Aldrich on this big important mission? That's the main definer.
Perhaps it also implies that the red-robed deacons, who are still wearing their original way of white vestments, were less willing converts. That they were only later compelled to side with the cult of the deep, when MacDonald and Aldrich took power.
This is also an argument to be had, that some of them, you know, they haven't really made the full transition yet. You know, they're kind of reluctant, right? Like, they're kind of trapped, as it were, right? Like, if I don't do this, he's gonna kill me. You can see this if you reverse their dialogue, right? So there's definitely that element too.
Thus, they are still wearing their red robes, and this is likely a sign.
Again, keep in mind, this is the same ambient dialogue that Smough had mistakenly attributed to the crawling carrion of Aldrich earlier. So just FYI.
of their lesser ranks within the new power structure. If this is true, then I also find it fitting that only purple-robed deacons can be found in Anor Londo, as if only the most loyal of the deacons accompanied their master, whereas the rest were relegated to guard duty at the cathedral.
Except for those who were bodyguards for Royce. I don't think we should leave those out, right? It's not like, you know, it's just one or the other. There's a slight overlap, because obviously Royce is still, he's in the big wig club. He hasn't switched out his robes yet, but he's in the big wig club. And obviously he's deep into his deep studies right now. Deep into deep studies. Deep into deep. No, damn, I can't keep that going.
Of the deep. I also find it interesting that there are only 2 purple deacons at the Cathedral of the Deep, and these
very annoyed these recolor/reskins aren't drops from the enemies. The blue deacons and the blue Lothric Knights, Golden Wing. Oh, I agree. I hate it that there's no variant. Obviously, if this was say made after Elden Ring, we might have gotten those variants using some sort of skin like needle thing, like the soul needler, and you would go through and be able to magically adjust it through the power of souls or something, or take the souls inside the cloth and edit it so that way it could take alternate, like, you know, just some bullshit explanation, right? Loki, could you create a playlist of videos like that on your channel where you react to lore videos of other creators? Oh, maybe I should do that. The problem is I've done so many videos over the time, and I've done so many reactions inside some of those videos, it would be hard to identify them all, but yeah, I should think about that. Because I want to do Loki looks as more like formal thing, but maybe when we're just doing something like this, it'll be yeah, maybe it should be its own playlist. Yeah, I'm gonna consider that. Thanks so much, Celeste.
On flanking Archdeacon Royce during the Deacons of the Deep boss fight. To me, it suggests that these two alone
Okay,
have
good.
remained
He's not
behind to
he's
ensure
not
the Cathedral
forgetting them.
remains loyal, to make sure that Royce also stays in line. Royce would remain by.
I don't think, again, I don't think it's about Royce staying in line, because as we can see, Royce is like, he's the one leading a lot of these efforts and stuff. Again, I think it's more so just about, these are the guys, like, we're gonna do, hey guys, we're gonna do the costume change because we're leaving or whatever. These guys, you're coming with me. Those who stay behind, you don't need to. Hey, a few of you guys, we have you do the costume change. Can you stay behind and be a bodyguard for Royce? Though again, I think it's completely fair to say, like, okay, is Royce really as loyal as he may seem to be with these bodyguards here? I think that's a fair point. I would make the same with the dancer and Vort stuff.
These two alone have remained behind to ensure the Cathedral remains loyal, to make sure that Royce also stays in line. Royce would remain by his master's casket, and Archdeacon MacDonald would follow Aldrich to Anor Londo to establish his cult and set about the business of collecting human dregs. I presume the purpose of this covenant is to help hasten Aldrich's plans, as if accumulating human dregs will allow Aldrich to bring about his Age of the Deep. The description...
Well, it's more about the fact that, well, the gods are the ones who are champions of the Age of Fire. They are the ones most invested in keeping the Age of Fire, obviously going, but exercising the dark. They are the deep and the dark's #1 enemies. It just makes sense. If you're going to be trying to herald in an Age of Deep Sea once this current cycle of the fire linking eventually peters out, you're going to want to get rid of the gods so they don't keep it going even longer. Sure, you could theoretically have more deep already, but Aldrich already foresees that's going to happen at this point, right? So...
of Deep Soul quite clearly illustrates that MacDonald turned to a worship of the Deep because he was delighted by the Deep and all it represented. Thus he would develop heretical sorceries that drew upon the powers of the Deep. I do also personally believe that MacDonald was a large factor in corrupting many of the Deacons. Not only is he clearly infatuated with the Deep, but he's also the one who brought sorcery to the Cathedral, which we could see as a
yeah, he's probably the biggest factor into why the ground was basically already set for Aldrich to basically convert everyone else, because between everything happening at the Cathedral and someone like MacDonald at the helm, it's obvious that this was kind of already the direction they were going in, slowly but surely. It was more focused on themselves, but then when Aldrich comes back, he can unite them as a leader to become the symbol and face of their new religion.
Gateway drug to the Deacons. The first
gateway drug's a really good way to put it.
Corruption.
I agree. I think that's a perfect way to frame it.
MacDonald who taught the clerics how to use sorceries in the first place. And while this was initially seen as a compromise of principles for the greater good, so that they could wield fire against the Deep, it would later be used to harness the powers of the Deep. This is something we learn from the description of Deep Soul, which explicitly tells us that MacDonald was the one to teach these deep spells to Royce and the other Deacons. He was the teacher of this new religion, and hence became a leading member of Aldrich's faction. In my mind, MacDonald is the one who first worshipped the Deep, the Erebus of the Dark Souls world for my Warhammer friends, and he then spread his heretical beliefs and practices to Royce and the other Deacons. No wonder it was he who headed up the Aldrich faithful, the most zealous adherent of Aldrich and the Deep. This corruption from containment to worship is well illustrated by the item description of the Deep Braille Divine Tome, which reads as follows: a Braille Divine Tome of the Deep, belonging to the Deacons of the Cathedral, intended to teach divine protection to the Deacons of the Deep, but later dark tales were added to its pages, such that it is now considered a thing profane. This book once contained only miracles that protected the Deacons from the Deep's corrupting power. Instead, the Deacons of the Deep have now added heretical miracles to its pages, born of their new infatuation with the Deep. Further proof that the Deacons and the Cathedral now worship the Deep they once contained can be found in the hands of the Evangelist, who unleashed the miracle Gnaw, a power which calls upon the creatures of the Deep to tear apart the target. There is also a more advanced version of Gnaw called Doris's Gnawing, and it reads as follows: Miracle of Doris the Deranged Evangelist. Those who linger too long on the brink of the Deep will often slip. Doris is sure to have wallowed in this darkness, intoxicated by its peril, so this offers a good insight on how the Deep corrupted the Cathedral and the Deacons. A case of staring into the abyss too long, it seems. Those who were dedicated to the containment of the Deep were, of course, in close contact with its power, and over time became enchanted by its power. We already saw this with MacDonald, someone who was delighted by the Deep's properties, but it seems others, including this Doris, felt the same way. It is likely that this corruption happened during Aldrich's imprisonment, and by the time Aldrich was awoken by the Bell of Awakening, the Cathedral was likely already rotten to the core. It just took Aldrich's leadership to finish their corruption and make their turn to Deep worship more complete and overt.
Exactly.
But with all that said, we need to consider Aldrich himself. How is it that he has visions of the Age of the Deep, and what even is his connection to it? Well, we do need to consider Aldrich's dietary habits. Again, referring to Hawkwood's dialogue, Aldrich turned to sludge before he was confined to the cathedral, meaning that even before he came to learn of the Deep, he had devoured countless humans. Well, remember what we discussed about Kagari corruption and the Deep, how it is a stagnant cradle of corruption. Kagari can be caused by a number of different sources, but a primary source is contact with corpses, or committing taboo acts. Cannibalism ticks both of these boxes, being a very impure act that would absolutely corrupt the soul. I therefore believe that his body's corruption is a reflection of his spiritual corruption. Additionally, Aldrich's body would have become host to numerous humanity sprites and souls that may well have begun to stagnate within him. These of course accumulating in his body due to all the humans he has devoured, absorbing their humanity and souls in the process. These would begin to stagnate within him, replicating the conditions of the Deep, and likely forming a connection between it and him. His body would then soften into sludge due to this connection, becoming more liquid-like. In short, Aldrich's habits corrupted him, and made him a sort of microcosm for the Deep's power. Additionally, Aldrich will have come into close proximity to the Deep when he was imprisoned at the cathedral, and he would have plenty of time to envisage his new world. I think this is the best moment to also discuss the Aldrich Accursed, the spider-like monster we fight in both the Cathedral
I was wondering when they would come up.
of the Deep and Anor Londo. Both of these drop one of Aldrich's rings, the Aldrich's Ruby and Sapphire. The description for these rings that we have already examined suggests that these creatures were once people, followers of Aldrich with whom he shared his love for eating people. Their transformation into these beasts is therefore implied to be a result of them being cannibals, and their visual form definitely supports this. Like Aldrich, we can see the skeletons of their victims protruding from their body, and as I suggested earlier, I believe these corpses to be the still-aware remnants of their victims, those who remain conscious during the digestive process. Ultimately, these beasts are kin to Aldrich, and likely some of his most powerful guardians. It's hard to know when the corruption of the Deacons took place, but it likely took place over a slow period of time. We already see that the Deacons began to dabble in forbidden practices
I wonder if he's going to touch on the petrification now, because that's something that still hasn't come up.
by the time of Aldrich's imprisonment, dabbling in sorceries, facilitating Aldrich's depraved needs, and it isn't hard to imagine their full fall to the Deep, evolving from there. I would suggest that it was MacDonald who led his parish down this path, given it is he who already broke convention by teaching his fellows sorcery.
Yep.
This process likely took place over time, during Aldrich's imprisonment, to enough of a degree that when Aldrich emerged from his casket, following his lighting of the flame, he was able to convince enough of his fellows to follow him into damnation. His first and most loyal followers would don the new purple robes of his creed, but eventually all Deacons who remained would submit to Aldrich's rule. If there was any resistance among the Deacons, we cannot know, but by the current era, the cathedral is an Aldrich faithful stronghold, and 2 out of 3 of the archdeacons
We can. Just look at the bodies. One of them is a holy woman of the Way of White. Like, yeah. There were those who said, no, we're not interested in all this. Aldrich fixed that one real quick. Okay, you don't want to cooperate? Down in my gut. They were squashed like grapes by the giants. That's another thing. I wish he brought up the giant slaves more in connection to Sulyvahn and stuff. I think that would have been an important point to make. But hey, you can't remember everything.
had pledged loyalty to him. The third and final archdeacon, Klimt, has offered his loyalty to another being found within the cathedral, Rosaria. But it seems as though Aldrich eventually left the cathedral in order to make his vision come true, which would require him to devour a god. As for how this would facilitate the Deep's victory, we can speculate. Most likely he believes that by eating and absorbing a god, he himself would gain the power of a god. Thus he would have the power to usher in the Age of the Deep.
No, that has nothing to do with that. Again, the gods are the agents, which are the biggest champions for the Age of Fire, and thereby preventing the Age of Dark. Aldrich imagines that the Age of Dark, when it will arrive, will be an Age of Deep based on the current trajectory of everything. This is a reasonable belief, and it pans out when we get to the DLC and play through the Drakekeep. So all of that is consistent. It doesn't require any crazy esoteric ideas about him like pulling a Smough and absorbing the power of a god or anything like that. It's just a matter of, I need to get rid of the people who are in my way. Gwyndolin is the hugest impediment. Again, as I said earlier, Gwyndolin is supposed to be the chief god. He's the effective king of the gods of the Way of White right now. With him out of the way, Sulyvahn loses all of his power base. The Way of Light loses one of its biggest proponents. Everything else is going to be able to fall from there. When all of these institutional forces are removed, what is going to be holding together the gods? Certainly nothing as powerful and as strong as the institutions that exist currently, like the Way of White. So if all of that ends up collapsing, fracturing, fragmenting, just generally degrading, it's to Aldrich's benefit. And when his Age of the Deep Sea comes and the fire is finally gone, he can finally just sweep away these little remnants, off the table.
And rule over it, as Gwyn once did as the god of his era. We can see that Aldrich is able to absorb elements of his prey, given that he is now able to wield some of Gwyndolin's own power, such as his arrow attack, which was the god's signature move in Dark Souls 1. Gwendolin is still being slowly digested at this stage, but it shows that what is left of Gwyndolin's corpse is now one with Aldrich, his powers co-opted by the Devourer. Additionally, we know that while devouring Gwyndolin,
in fact, if you actually make comparisons between some of Gwyndolin's attacks and Aldrich's attacks, you see the direct parallels. The summoning multiple small little, soul, little, not pebbles, but, little small soul, little buggy things, that kind of chase after you. Him summoning giant beams and things like that. It's all taken from Gwyndolin's playbook.
he began to have visions of Gwendolyn's sister, Yorshka. These are Gwendolyn's thoughts and memories, being absorbed by Aldrich, showing that whatever is left of Gwendolyn is slowly being merged and consumed by the Devourer. So there does seem to be some method to the madness, as Gwendolyn's power does seem to be something that Aldrich can harness upon consuming him. And it just so happens that Aldrich was aware of Gwendolyn, the god who remained at the top of the Way of White's pantheon, and still resided in Anor Londo. He himself was once a cleric, and so was no doubt acutely aware of Gwendolyn's location. And so it seems as though Aldrich and his posse came to Irithyll, as we find that Archdeacon MacDonald and a large contingent of deacons are here, guarding the passage up to Anor Londo, giving their master the time he needs to devour Gwendolyn. It seems as though when Aldrich came to Irithyll, he brought destruction with him. The Pontiff Knights we face here are actually dead. They are just spirits now. This is something we can learn from the Pontiff Knight Curved Sword, which reads as follows. Curved sword wielded by the Pontiff's Knights, frigid spirits that linger in Irithyll. The large blade appears to be eaten away by insects, making it lightweight, but also brittle. The fact these blades have been eaten away by insects should be immediately apparent to you, given all we've discussed about the insect-like beings that exist within the deep. My interpretation of all this is that when Aldrich came here, he slaughtered the Pontiff's army, whether intentionally or just by the nature of the deep aura that surrounded him. The idea that these knights are now just resurrected spirits of knights who were killed by the deep is further corroborated by their spit attack, in which they seem to spit a dark projectile, showing that they are full of dark energy. And you'll note that these projectiles are purple, not black and white. Black and white is what we would normally associate with humanity and the abyss. However, the purple makes it clear that these powers are born of the deep specifically, telling us that these knights were overwhelmed and killed by Aldrich and the deep. We have noted already that the deep has a habit of consuming and puppeteering its victims, and I think that is what we are seeing here. Additionally, MacDonald appears to have set up shop in the aqueduct below Anor Londo, recruiting more to the Aldrich faithful cause, and as such...
I should say I think the fact that the Pontiff Knights are back and they're clearly serving the aims of Sulyvahn tells us that it's not because of the deep that they are alive. I think it's just a matter of Sulyvahn's using some otherwise hereto unknown necromancy type work, which again may be dark related, knowing him, and it may even be related to why his phase 2 triggers at the time that it does. But the point being is that I'm pretty sure this is all just Sulyvahn. I don't think this has to do with Aldrich himself. But yes, I agree with this. It's very clear that Aldrich and MacDonald came here violently. The very fact they left the dolls behind should tell you that. Like, if they had the dolls, they could just walk in through the barrier. They didn't bring the dolls. They were not coming with peaceful intentions.
The grounds behind the cathedral became the hunting grounds for these invaders. The purpose of this seems to be to harvest the human dregs found within their human victims. MacDonald would then...
No, again, the goal is to defend the God Eater. This is the point. Again, Aldrich Faithful is a localization thing. The Covenant's actually called just the defenders, the protectors of the God Eater, right? Or Devourer of Gods, as he's called in localization. But I know that can confuse people because they're like, wait, gods plural? No. It's just God Eater. It's not meant to be. It's not meant to be like giving you the number. Aldrich all character is also based on turning. Oh, that's a little confusing. Mania, sorry to say, is based on turning sainthood into a twisted version of it, like asceticism, but from cannibal. Yeah, you get the ideas. Like usually when you think of asceticism, you think of okay, you eat, you're eating less, you're kind of fasting type of stuff. But no, obviously for Aldrich, his idea of fasting is instead of devouring humans, I'm devouring one god. It's like wow, what a great deal, what an ascetic you are, right?
Gather these dregs to help bring about the Age of the Deep. But how? Well, Loki offers a great suggestion in his article, where he suggests that MacDonald was down here to corrupt the water supply with these human dregs, thus hastening the deep spread within the Boreal Valley. Additionally, one might wonder why Sulyvann's watchdogs can be found here guarding his body. I've always taken this to be an example of Sulyvann's reluctant alliance with Aldrich, with these watchdogs being assigned to MacDonald so that he can go about his grim work in peace. However, Loki offers an alternate explanation, and he instead sees it as evidence of the Pontiff trying to wrest control of the capital back from Aldrich's followers, that Sulyvahn sent these dogs to kill MacDonald, and thus remove the most powerful leader of Aldrich's cult. What do you think about this suggestion? Do you agree that this is evidence of Sulyvahn pushing back against Aldrich's control?
It's not just the beast, it's also the illusory wall to hide it all, right? Like, you don't do this, you don't try to cover up all of this when this is all just, it's just an uneasy alliance. Why does Aldrich's weapon look like Nito's weapon? Just for the reference, again, it's Aldrich is closely associated with death, skeletons, bones, all of that jazz. Just take that and then tell essentially, oh god, the dogs, 1 second, chat. Oh, dear God. Sorry about the delay. Whew. This dog is driving me up a wall. Sometimes she just goes crazy over the littlest things. All right, so where was I? Oh, yeah, Nito's weapon. Okay, so long story short, it looks like Nito's weapon because Aldrich and Nito both share a death association. And it's a lot better than them making something from scratch. They could just import or reuse the model. Maybe they had a different idea for it originally, but that seems to be the idea. It has nothing to do with other theories about, oh, he ate Nito or something like, no. God, it's very clear by all indications, Gwendolyn is the first and so far only god that Aldrich has in fact devoured. Does he have time or reason to go after Nito at this point? Like, Nito's been dead for God knows how long. Where do you even start looking to find the body or anything? Like, completely separate tangent there. But the point is just like, you know what? If you have a character that's associated with bones and death, he has literal skeletons inside his entire sludge being that's taking up the entire boss arena. You may as well give him a cool little magic spear that he'll cast at the start of the fight, so he'll have something approaching a weapon to hit you with. He's not just smacking you with a stick. Anyway, back to the content.
In the comments below. Either way, Sulyvahn is unlikely to have been happy about Aldrich's return to Irithyll, his former underling now far more powerful and influential than himself. The pontiff would have been powerless to resist Aldrich, and thus he likely acquiesced to Aldrich.
I mean, just look at Aldrich at Sulyvahn's getup right now. He's had a rough time. It's not been easy on him. He lost his shoes. He hasn't even had time to put on a new pair. Man, it sucks being the pontiff right now.
Demands. Indeed, we know from Sulyvahn's soul that it was he who offered Gwendolyn to Aldrich, no doubt a move to save his own skin and buy more time. The soul also mentions that the pontiff was the one who locked Gwendolyn in the cathedral, meaning Gwendolyn had no escape from Aldrich's predations. I've always read this as something that happened all at once, that upon Aldrich's arrival, Sulyvahn locked Gwendolyn inside his own cathedral, and directed Aldrich to eat to his heart's content. In some ways this would benefit him. With Gwendolyn's death, the pontiff would have no one to answer to, and would be the de facto head of the church. In fact, back in 2016, I used to believe that Sulyvahn conspired with Aldrich willingly, so that he might remove Gwendolyn and thus take over the church. However, I no longer believe his dealings with Aldrich here was something he sought out. After all, we have reviewed plenty of evidence that suggests that Sulyvahn saw Aldrich as a problem to be solved, to be contained, not anyone he would willingly work with. The reality is that Sulyvahn is not in control of the capital anymore. Aldrich and his cult are, and this is a state of affairs that the power-hungry pontiff would have never accepted. Instead, I believe he offered up Gwendolyn, purely because he had no choice but to comply with Aldrich's demands. Again, Loki offers a slightly different explanation for this chain of events, suggesting that Sulyvahn actually had imprisoned Gwendolyn long before this, mainly for his own political gain. This mainly comes from Loki's translation of Sulyvahn's soul, which reads as follows. It is said that Pontiff Sulyvahn of Irithyll confined the chief god of the former royal family to the abandoned church, and ultimately offered him to the God-Eater. So the word ultimately implies that there was a long period of time between Gwendolyn's imprisonment and his eventual death at the hands of Aldrich.
So ultimately, in the end, at last, like, the point is that you don't do this normally in Japanese. Normally in Japanese, you would just string together all the different, what's the word? Not sentences, but, sentence participles, whatever they're called, right? I don't know all the formal fancy words, right? But anyway, the point is that you take all these separate little pieces of the sentence and you just string them together in Japanese normally, right? You often don't even have a formal and in these things. It's just basically a string of run-on sentences until finally you kind of wrap it up at the end with the text. So in this case, the point being is that when you insert a word like ultimately, in the end, into here, you are by kind of inherently suggesting that there is an extended period of time. You are trying to posit that there is more than just and then these events happen one after the other, right? Obviously, context can change this thing on how wide the timetable is, but this is what happens when the writer is trying to tell you these are two separate events that take place over a larger period of time. You really need to be careful with how you're trying to connect them, right? So wait, Aldrich made Pontiff his B? Yep. All this time I thought Pontiff was an Aldrich fanboy or just using Aldrich as puppeteer. He is interested in the deep, and you can see this in the dungeon. He does take an incredible interest in the deep. But here's the thing with Pontiff Sulyvahn. He's interested in everything. He's just he is a sorcerer through and through. He is just a man who is fascinated about the world and wants to understand this world around him that he exists in. And he's willing to explore everything, including the heretical stuff, which is why he stops being cuddling up to Gwendolyn and starts trying to take power for himself, because he understands that Gwendolyn has become a shackle for him that he will never be able to go beyond. So originally Gwendolyn was a stepping stone to put him in a position where he could gain, learn, and acquire more power, understand more about sorcery. But then he finally sees that no, it's better if I am the one who's using Gwendolyn's power for myself, right? Which is the whole point of the confinement aspect. It's very critical that we understand this, that the imprisonment of Gwendolyn and the offering up are separate. It's also the only thing that makes sense. You can't have Aldrich doing all this stuff when Gwendolyn is running free. I'm surprised that Smough hasn't brought this up yet. And everything we're talking about, no, somehow Gwendolyn and his Blades of the Dark Moon aren't there in any of the stuff involving Sulyvahn or Aldrich or any of that, right? Like this, like it's common sense. Everything makes it clear that Sulyvahn is the one who was in charge. He took control, and he had basically cleared out any and all forces which could oppose him. These would include Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn, during this entire stage, has to be imprisoned. And then, after all that significant time, when we get to the present day, by the time we reach Anor Londo during the events of the story, Gwendolyn is already being devoured. I originally heard of Loki from Smough, and I'm here at Loki stream looking at his reaction to a Smough video. I love circularity. It's all cycles, chat. It all is like a ring.
If Loki is correct, then it suggests that Sulyvahn had long usurped Gwendolyn by the time Aldrich arrived, rather than his...
Well, again, I think it's evident just looking at what Smough is saying this throughout this entire video. That's obviously what happened. You can't really look at this and try to say, you know, Gwendolyn was still there, apparently doing jack shit.
Imprisonment coinciding with this event. But why would the Pontiff have long imprisoned Gwendolyn even before Aldrich arrived? Well, likely for his own political gain, so that he could replace Gwendolyn as the head of the church. Loki notes that in the original Japanese, Sullivan's soul describes Gwendolyn as
he is bringing it up. I'm happy about this.
the chief god, or Allfather. That is the chief of the pantheon, and the de facto head of the Way of White, taking the position that Gwen's uncle Lloyd once did. Given that he is the last remaining member of the old royal family in Anor Londo, it is unsurprising that Gwendolyn became the head god after Gwen's fall, and the events of Dark Souls 1. The idea that Gwendolyn was deposed and locked away by Sulyvahn long ago is supported by Yorshka's dialogue, in which she says Sulyvahn used her brother's illness to his advantage, declaring himself as the Pontiff, and then imprisoned her as well. This suggests that publicly Sulyvahn proclaimed that Gwendolyn was sick.
I just want to confirm there. Yeah, he's just...
And then imprisoned her as well. This suggests that publicly Sulyvahn proclaimed that Gwendolyn was sick, and thus he would rule in the god's name, whilst also...
Yes, this is true. There is a lot. Again, I say it again and again. You gotta run the scenarios for this stuff. A lot of people kind of go with something because it makes sense to them first, but they don't ever actually try to excavate this or run this through the scenario of how this actually would play out. A lot of stuff was like, oh no, you know, like for example, one of the big theories I saw way back when Dark Souls, when I was first getting into the Souls community, was this idea that not only were Sulyvahn and Aldrich actually in together on imprisoning and having Aldrich devoured, but that all this happened before Aldrich was even imprisoned in the Cathedral of the Deep. How do you make that? How do you square that circle? I don't know. Like, you cannot have the entire point where Aldrich, who is devouring Gwendolyn after becoming Lord of Cinder, is doing so before he's imprisoned in the Cathedral of the Deep, which is a prerequisite for him becoming Lord of Cinder. It just doesn't make sense. So, you know, people get this sometimes. You know, fans, they will get these ideas in their heads and they become part of like common mantra, and they just don't think this through. But again, when you actually go through and you're actually analyzing every bit and you're trying to put all this stuff into a cohesive order, you start realizing, okay, this can't happen, this can't happen, this can happen, and it naturally limits you within a certain framework of the events that happen. And you're like, oh my God, this just makes sense. It just flows naturally. It flows logically. Oh, and this happens more probably because this happened, and that happened then because of that. Like, it's one of these things where once it all clicks together, once you kind of get all the parts in place, everything just sort of falls together and just makes sense. And a lot of people just don't want to go through that process, I feel like. And again, I don't blame them. You know, this is a lore for a video game. This is not like something very important in your life, all things considered. You can take, you know, you can go without knowing truly the lore of Dark Souls. Hey, Miyazaki is happy. If you're someone who got everything wrong, but you think you got it right and you're happy with it, Miyazaki's happy because you got to get some enjoyment out of his game because you thought you figured it all out. That is the appeal of the From Software storytelling, is that he's going to try to present you the truth. He's going to try to show it to you. He maybe will even try to reinforce that point through sequels and stuff if he gets the chance. But ultimately, it is up to the fans to figure it all out. And sometimes the fans don't.
Writing a cover story for why no one would ever see the Dark Moon again, when in reality he wasn't sick, he was imprisoned, and so was Yorshka. This all lines up with his pattern of behaviour we've highlighted throughout this video. He made savvy political moves to depose the old gods and their family. Gwendolyn, Yorshka, Rosaria, the Dancer, and anyone else who's related to the royal family were imprisoned or exiled. Then, when Aldrich returned to Irithyll...
Honestly, I would love for Smough to do an entire separate thing on just Sulyvahn. I see why he's doing this. He kind of has to cover this stuff on Sulyvahn because it's a necessary prerequisite to understand the context with Aldrich. This is one of the problems also with like Smough doing all his videos and stuff out of order. Obviously, if you read my Dark Souls 3 content in my guide page from beginning to end, you get a pretty, you know, mostly like coherent, you know, logical flow of events and everything. So you can kind of get the full context of everything and where it's relevant and how it's relevant. But I think that what we're seeing here, it's like, yeah, it's good that we're covering the stuff on Sully. I would really love a more comprehensive video because there's so much more to talk about when it came to Sully. I think everyone should know that the Chapel of Anticipation has solid gold pebbles. Ooh, Ooh, I almost forgot about that detail, Xavier. Thanks for the reminder. Yeah, because it's got all the little earth and stuff like that with it. Yeah. Still, will never not be crazy how little people know about what is going on in this massively popular game. Again, it's the nature of the beast. Again, this is why, like, I tell people, like, ultimately I don't care if people subscribe to my my positions on the lore and stuff like that, or if they get it or whatever, right? Like, I'm not, like, that's not my hill to die on. I'm going to be presenting all the missing data I think that they know. I'm going to show people how they can look at that data, factoring in the stuff like localization and stuff that is probably the biggest impediment to understanding these games lore. And then, that's up for people then to make their own decisions and do with my information what they will, right? Like, I'm, that it's one of those things where it's like I said, this is not the most important thing in the world. It's not like this is going to decide the fate of your immortal soul or anything, whether or not you understand the proper history of Dark Souls or not. It's just one of those things where it's like, if you're in this discussion, if you are in this space or whatever, I would hope that you're someone who's actually using your critical thinking skills. You're not just coming in here so casually, because we've had like years and years and years to kind of move on from, casual, superficial discussions about what is happening and what's moving on. Like we need to get with the program. I would argue, just as a broader community, I would say it's, and in some respects, I think we have uplifted it. I think, like, for example, with Elden Ring, I think the conversation has been a lot stronger than it would be if this was during the Demon Souls and Dark Souls era, from what I've seen with those, like, what, 10-15-year-old lore videos and stuff, probably closer to 20 in some cases. But then you have also, like, sort of all this, what's the word? You have a lot more, by the nature of games and stuff getting bigger, you also have just a lot more kind of batshit insane stuff also coming out, and that can muddy the waters. But, that's just the nature of it. You have to filter through the dross.
Sulyvahn had no recourse but to offer Aldrich the meal he so desired, and as we have suggested, perhaps it gave him some time while Aldrich devoured his meal. Time for Sulyvahn to wrest control back from Aldrich's cult. However, what neither Sulyvahn nor Aldrich likely reckoned with was the arrival of the Ashen One, who had come to claim the head of the God Eater. Had he not intervened, who knows what would have happened to the world at large? Perhaps Aldrich would have fully absorbed Gwendolyn's power, and would have had the strength to help bring about the Age of the Deep, an age in which the murky metaphysical waters of the deep would seep through the fabric of the world, a deluge akin to the biblical flood. The otherworldly nature of the deep is reinforced by the description of the deep gem, which reads as follows: "There is a darkness that lies beyond human ken. The deep is a concept we aren't meant to truly understand, and it is only Aldrich who has glimpsed into its true nature. Yet in Aldrich's soul, we are given a hint as to what is to come, an age of the deep sea. An age in which the world is consumed entirely by a deep sea, again calling to mind the biblical story of the flood, in which the world was effectively reset by God via the use of a worldwide flood."
I'll be honest, I've never really made that connection. That's an interesting thing to think about, of this idea of a reset with a biblical flood type thing. I think you can maybe make some parallels there. I don't think it's as strong. I don't think they lean into it. Obviously, there's no, like, arc parallel really in this case, but, I think the general idea is at least worth pondering.
My belief is that Aldrich has foreseen a similar event, that as the power of the deep grows, as the world further stagnates, that stagnation will eventually breach the dam, and the deep sea will flood the world, heralding an age of the deep sea. In my mind, the canon ending of Dark Souls 3 is the one in which we let the fire finally fade for good, and thus the world's stagnation comes to an end, as the natural progression of the dark takes hold. However,
we're missing the Londor ending there, Smough. That's a very funny way of saying Londor is supreme.
Aldrich successful, or if the fire is continually relit, I believe that the stagnation of the natural flow would have eventually resulted in the Age of the Deep Sea, a karmic response to the endless extension of the age.
Again, the Age of the Deep Sea, or the Age of, again, these are things of which we frame word-wise to go with the general macro affinity that the universe is heading toward. And I agree there would be an Age of the Deep Sea if things were allowed to continue along the path. Of course, we subvert that, and I think Smough also makes that point of what would happen if our journey did not occur and stuff like that. And thematically, again, it's this, like I said earlier, it's this point about why are we the ones, why is it important that we're the ones to make the choice? Because if we don't make the choice, someone much worse like Aldrich might make the choice, and we don't want that. The ultimate matter is that, whether it's, fate or happenstance, right, or just pure, good old human luck, in the end, we are the ones who are prove ourselves and place ourselves through our own efforts, through our own triumph over adversity, into the positions to make the decision for the world's fate, and whether or not we will keep us on this futile future or try to chart a new path. And of course, as Dark Souls 3 tries to highlight, that path has become infinitely more difficult to navigate due to all of these constant fire linkings. Again, I don't think Smough fully appreciates just how much the circumstances have changed from Dark Souls 1 and why we have forces like Londor pursuing different paths than the simple binary that we had in the original game. I also wish he'd focus on the petrification stuff, but let's watch him wrap this up first.
Your fire, a horrifying vision of the future that would see Aldrich elevated. And if it is something that this vile creature wants, then you can bet your bottom dollar that the age of the deep sea would not be a kind age for humanity. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for joining me. That is my take on Aldrich and the Deep, one of the most fascinating elements of Dark Souls' story. While my channel started with Demon's Souls, it was my old video on Aldrich that truly acted as the foundation for my channel's growth. So it has been a great privilege to revisit that subject all these years later, especially since my understanding of this subject has greatly evolved. And once again, I want to thank Loki, a long-standing friend of the channel, who reached out to me with his articles on the subject, all of which enriched and influenced my understanding of the subject matter. And I was speaking to Loki about some of the subject matter of this video, and both of us agreed that Dark Souls 3 just has some of the best characters in the series, Sulyvahn and Aldrich being two of the greatest villains of the series, with Aldrich in particular really pushing the boundaries in terms of his cosmic nature and sheer depravity. Then we have characters like Rosaria, who, as I said earlier, is one of my favourite characters, a haunting and tragic character.
She's so good. Like I said, Dark Souls 3 just has really good villains, man. Like they're really good villains. Like you got even some of the ones that are kind of like you could have cut them in, like it wouldn't change much in terms of the overall narrative, like Wolnir or something. They're just really good, fascinating, interesting characters that explore interesting angles to this story and world, and you're like, oh man, like fuck. Why couldn't this have been Dark Souls 2?
Story provides a very understandable motivation behind her wanting to lash out at the world. I genuinely love the characters and story of Dark Souls 3, and I hope to cover more of it in detail. But with that said, I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on Aldrich and the Deep. What do you believe the Deep is? Do you disagree with my assessment? Let me know in the comments below.
I'm sorry, Smough. I got it. Okay, we're gonna end this here because he's at this part. I have to agree with Smough. I have to agree with you here, Smough. I disagree. I disagree. The entire notion of the Deep, I think you've overcomplicated it. I think you're looking so deep into the idea of the deep sea and all this stuff. It's quite simply just stagnant dark. And yes, stagnant dark on a macro level will form a hypothetical deep sea in the case of what we see beginning to form in the Dreadkeep. No, I don't think the Ring City counts in this Smough, because the Ring City, again, that's kind of infringing on all the stuff and what Philianor is doing in order to essentially prevent, it's a stagnation that's preventing stagnation effectively in the Ring City there. And I think you've completely kind of, that's gone over your head in that area. But like overall, I think this is a good video. I think he covers a lot of good parts. Obviously, he referenced me a few times. I don't think he referenced me, as much as he could have, to be honest, for a lot of this stuff. And I think in one case, he didn't need to reference me. He could have referenced some of the evidence in the game. It would have been fine. But it's one of these points that I feel, I feel like he got, like, he definitely, I think, got the broader strokes for sure on point. I think the biggest misstep was probably talking about the history to the history of the cathedral, relation to the Deep, and the larger cosmological implications of the Deep in general. But outside of that, I feel like this was pretty on point. There was the one mistake in terms of individual evidence with the crawling carrion. I wish that he didn't make that. Like, I think that was an unforced error. You could have easily validated that. Like I'm surprised because there are videos out there that like try to reverse the dialogue and be like, oh, he's gonna kill, the whole he's gonna kill me thing. Which again, From Software's done that before. They've done the reverse dialogue thing so many times with these characters. It ain't that deep, bro. Exactly. It just ain't that deep. All right, so let's see. Any other comments I want to go into? Because I think I've covered everything I want to say. Like I said, I think this is a solid video. It's got some problems, but I enjoyed it immensely. Great job on Smough. I hope this video pops off and he does more. I want that Guinevere video. Guinevere, Queen of Lothric. Queen of Lothric. All this is inspired me to write an article about environmental storytelling as the new revolutionary way to tell narratives. I hope the boomers will find it interesting when it comes out. I agree. I think what happens is that From Software has proven that what makes video games unique is their ability to express their narrative in an interactable game world. And so through stuff like items and item descriptions, which creates a kind of ludo-narrative exposition to the player, right? And much more seamless because you have to kind of go out and search for it, right? It's almost like you have a superpower where you pick up this item and you start feeling and seeing things related to it or something like that, right? Like that'd actually be a cool From Software game where they actually make the item descriptions part of the lore. Like there's a lore explanation for them. That'd be a neat detail, Miyazaki. Think about that. But then, like, you know, also just the way that the environment itself is telling you the narrative and the positions of both items and characters and things within that, and then, you know, the dialogue that then accompanies that and how these things may change under certain circumstances. All of that contributes to telling a story that isn't something you can do in the at least to the same extent within, say, other mediums such as books or movies, right? Because you not only do you have the viscerally visual element of a film that isn't necessarily replicable in other mediums like it is in games, but you also have that interactivity where you are the camera person. The camera is not fixed to whatever the director wants you to show. You have, to a large extent, are able to control where the camera is pointing, and so you are the one that helps direct the scene, as it were, through the storytelling. And so, you know, what you see or capture or miss or whatever is up to the choices of the player. And I think that's just, again, it really makes these games special. I'm gonna put the BGM on in the background again, chat, because we are, you know, I don't want you guys listening to me over dead air for now that the video's done. Whew. Overall, though, I mean, I hope you guys liked it. Again, like I said, I'm going to have the link in the description of the video once this thing is done. And you guys can watch the original at the original speed if you guys thought the ×2 was too much for you. But for me, I thought this was great. I loved it. I love the editing for it. Like I said, there were some problems or things like whatever, but you know what? We can, you know, if Smough just parodied everything I said, what's the point of Smough existing, right? That's what I feel about with every content creator. Like, if we were all just saying the same thing, there'd be no point for any of us coming out here. We have to be adding something to the discussion, not pointlessly, right? We can't just be throwing, you know, flinging shit around and hoping something will stick to the wall. But, you know, if these are going to be like the unique ideas that Smough is going to, you know, differ from me on, I can accept that compared to some of the other stuff that we've heard. For sure. It's not the most egregious. And just overall, I feel like there were some areas he could have gotten more depth for, like the petrification and stuff. Maybe gone a little bit more into some of the details about, you know, Sulyvahn and Aldrich's histories and things with Irithyll and stuff of that nature. Maybe a bit more into the Henri Horus thing. But let's be honest, this was almost a 2-hour video already. This is huge. This was a huge topic. This is a difficult topic. If he did Guinevere, it would be probably maybe an hour at most if he's covering all the games. But, like, it's very simple. For one, have to say that I feel that he did a great job with this, considering how much content he has to condense. And listen, if you guys really want the full detail stuff, there's always my articles. He himself encouraged it. Like, you can read all of my stuff on Dark Souls 3 in the Deep. You can get my takes on some of the stuff he's talking about. Again, I'm happy that he was able to include as much of me as he did. Again, special thanks to Smough for including me in this process at all. I appreciate it. And even, you know, giving me the shout out like that. Like, you didn't have to do that. So I really, you know, I'm just really loving that we were able to collab on something like this. And I hope that we can do so more in the future, because I want more Dark Souls 3 content. Please let me see it. You know, now that I've like mostly finished my stuff on Dark Souls, right? Like, most of my work on Dark Souls 2 is wrapping up. Dark Souls 3 is wrapping up, right? Like, I'm really shifting a lot more into Elden Ring and Bloodborne now. It's really nice to have people who are going back to Dark Souls and really, you know, it's scratching that itch, man. It's like, damn, man, I love talking about these games and their lore. Discussions what makes Soul so alive even now more than, yeah, exactly, right? So like I said, if you're gonna get some stuff wrong on, like, you know, I don't know if this necessarily say on the margins, but like on stuff like this extent, I'm okay with that. Like I said, I think Smough, this isn't a bad video by Smough. It's even the stuff I disagree with, it's well reasoned enough, right? It's well reasoned, it's fair. It's perfectly aligned with the evidence stuff mentioned. It doesn't really, like, leave out anything too egregious to counteract some of these things. I think he's just missing context and seeing the bigger picture with everything else, and like sort of like, you know, how that whole shapes his idea of how everything else would go. But, like, again, this is something where I'm like saying, like, it's gonna happen, chat. Like, I'm a Souls fan. I can't read. Only listen to Vati. Well, I guess, yeah, I guess that's what we gotta do, Sub-Zero. I guess we're gonna have to find a way to turn my my article stuff into audiobooks. Gotta hire Vati so he doesn't just narrate Abyssal Archive. He's gotta narrate like literally all my website content. He would kill me. He would. I'm pretty sure he would stab me in the back. Like, he would come all the way over from Australia, like track me down to my house and like just tag me down and shiv me through the throat. All right. So, are there any more last minute questions before we wrap things up here, chat? Because I'm feeling like we've got I feel like we've got pretty much like this whole reaction thing is done. I feel like I've answered a lot of questions already throughout it. It ended up taking a fair amount of time, but not too much, honestly. So I'm looking forward to what else comes in the future that we may want to do reactions to. And yeah, I might create a new playlist just for these types of things if people really want to go back and watch and reference these things. I'll be honest, I feel like it'd still be better if you guys just read my content or what have you. I feel like that's probably the best way to do it than just listening to me off the cuff like so. But you know what? If you guys consider it helpful on a personal level, who am I to judge? Who am I to argue even? Quick question. Do you know Sabaku no Maiku? Famous Italian content creator about souls. Yes, I'm pretty sure I've talked to Maiku before. I know I've talked to, was it Lamia? Oh god, I'm forgetting names again. Yeah, so I've definitely talked to the big wigs in the Italian community before. They've interacted with me, they've reached out. So I am familiar with them, sure. Yeah, and believe me, I'm aware of some of the Italian translation stuff. Some even casual fans have shared some of the little oopsies the Italian does. Now, understand this. From what I've been able to find out, the Japanese script gets translated to English. Then the English script gets sent out to all the European countries. I don't know if it's outside of just the European countries, because I think, from what I can tell, it looks like Korea and China do their own independent translations, as far as I'm aware. But for sure, the European countries get like French, Italian, etc. They're all based on the English script. So you're getting a terrible localization of, like, say, Dark Souls 1, and then that is getting a terrible localization on top of that from the Italian side. So it's like, it's going through, like, you're like going through two separate, really, really, really muddy filters, and it leads to some crazy stuff. It's Lammy, Loki. It's Lammy. Yeah, I'm sorry. I cannot remember names sometimes, Chad. Just how my brain works. Try doing lore videos without script, just you talking, you'll become king on YouTube. I don't know about that, Celeste, but we will consider maybe me taking a different approach when it comes to the, at least the live stream content. I view Pontiff like the proto Radigan, someone who wanted power but also aspired to understand the world deeper and got to actually be the final boss. Yeah, I think that's a fair comparison. I can see the parallels there. I feel like what makes Radigan, though, different from Pontiff is that Radigan at least arguably has some, I wouldn't say noble intentions, but some relatable intentions, right? Insofar as he's someone who, like, you could see him having a happy life with Renala, if not for the fact that he was tied down to Marika, and he has been consumed by this existential crisis of the fact that he is effectively Marika, but not Marika, and he just wants to kind of be his own person, right? So if not for all of that, you could see how he is in some ways maybe fighting to have a normal life, whereas for Sully, it's the pursuit of power simply for curiosity's sake, right? Like he's the ultimate form of the sorcerer archetype in Miyazaki's games, right? Like the Freck 2.0, as it were, right? The Freck, the Logan, the Aldia, so it kind of like distills all that idea about the pursuit of curiosity and reason for reason's sake, and the fanatical ends that will lead you to. Obviously, with Pontiff, there's the nice twist where it's like a false fanaticism, right? He's not actually dedicated to the religion that he's becomes part of, right? But it's a very interesting dynamic. And again, like I said, Sulyvahn's just a good character. Like, there's just so much good stuff there. I talked to him and said, "You're his mentor, LOL. If in Italy we could have access to LoreCon, it's really because of you, Loki." Oh, really? I did not know I was his mentor. I had no idea. I knew about him separately, but I'll be honest, I did not know I was mentoring anybody. But if I served as people's inspiration in other communities to do what I do, that's all I wanted. That's all I want, is for people to look at the Japanese script. Like, please, please, please get back to the original text. That's all I want. Everyone should be using the same script as their reference point and working off that, because that's the only way you're going to get anything good and consistent out of these games. Sully's born from nothing, naturally wants to rise and never again fall between the forces. Yeah, that's a very good point, right? Like, Sully started out as in a world without power, and he didn't really appreciate the fact that he came from a world of outcasts and outsiders, right, from nothing, right? But the climb up the ladder to power is what's allowed him to be able to fulfill all of his dreams or whatever, right? And so he can't go back down. He can't go back to being nothing at that point, because once he becomes nothing, he loses access to all the resources and comforts that allow him to be able to operate as this endless inquirer that he is, right? That he's able to look into all these different things all across the world and spend all those resources in order to acquire those things for his own studies and stuff, right? Like, it's not, not everything he gets in Irithyll Dungeon is something he can find at home, right? Or you could download my retranslation mod. It's totally not self-advertisement. Yeah, that's true. Nobre has done retranslation for at least DS2, right? Nobre, have you done it for the other games? But like, it's one of those things that, yeah, I think it's really awesome that, there's been more awareness. If that's all I've contributed to the fandom over the years, it's just a greater awareness about the Japanese script and how how greatly the localizers have disserviced fans across all languages, at least here in the West. I feel like I've done my job. Oh, really? I'm the reason he started. Good. That I'm happy to be his inspiration, Celeste. Again, I feel honored to know that, anyone has taken any of my work and used it as their jumping off point to do the same. I think it's a needed role, especially in these communities where, they have it even worse off than the English somehow. God, I can't, it's such a terrible fate to have. Translations of translations, like, oh my god, and they're not even good translations to begin with. It's like, you mentioned earlier Pontiff looking rough. He didn't have time to put on shoes when we meet him, but he's from the painting. Being barefoot is his thing. Yeah, it's just part of their culture, I guess, chat. They just like walking around without their, when you're in a position of power, you don't wear shoes. The Pontiff is just following in that tradition. God, you know what the funny thing is? I could see that being a canon, the canon explanation going through Miyazaki's mind. I did DS3 some time ago, but that mod was wonky, so I'll see if I'll take some time to rework and mod it to a proper retranslation. Oh, cool, Nobre. Like, it's really neat. You gotta do Dark Souls 1, though, Nobre. Nobre, Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 1's the one that really needs it. Well, thank you, Nobre. I'm glad I've been of help to you as well. Like I say, guys, that's all I really want. Like I said, someone mentioned earlier there's a Russian translation of my book. I knew that was something we were working on. I didn't realize it happened. So to all the Russian fans out there, I hope you guys enjoy. I'm sorry, I don't know any Russian off the top of my head to say that. All I know is like "niet" or something. I don't think that's gonna be helpful. But yeah, like, again, if I'm able to help people and stuff and be able to help different languages and things, then good. I'm proud. Again, I'm just happy to help anybody, really. Like, this is one of the things. Like, I'm happy to help Smough. I'm happy to help you guys. I just want to help. I just want to help this community, and then I can like run off to the sunset and go back to being low key. You did do DS1 already? Damn. No, Bray. You know what? We need to schedule me going through the translation mod sometime then. We need to figure out at some point where I'm just going to do a playthrough with your mod installed then. Hopefully in a way that won't like break anything in case I want to uninstall it later and play normal game for any reason. So only game left then is 3 and you're done with the trilogy. Awesome. There's not even just a translation of translation. Like Alsana Italian says she's born from chaos and literally she says dark with her voice. Like how? Like I said, it's a translation of translation. They're not even good translations. Like it's crazy some of the stuff that will get filtered out from localization. Like I said, I still laugh whenever I see the whole Ornstein cut a boulder in half instead of pierce stone scales, because I know exactly how that happened. You glance at it, you take literally like 0.3 seconds to process it, and you just jot down the first thing that goes through your mind. And it's the most generic schlop imaginable. It's like, oh, pierce stone, the cut boulder in half. There, I'm done. Like, and you got paid for that. Like, thank God Demon Souls Remake, the localizers had the sense to try to fix at least some of the errors that they made with that game. It wasn't all of it to my liking, to be fair, especially on the dialogue side, but it was at least on the item description side especially, they did a lot better job there. I wish that the old translation, though, didn't inform the Blue Point when they were making the area names, though, because then we ended up with stuff like the Throne Room of Yormidar. Ah! Why is my fanon in my remake? Ah! Well, maybe I should replay DS1 with that. Yeah, I think, again, I would love to play Nobray's mods at some point. I just haven't been in the mood to do a fresh playthrough of Dark Souls 1. But if I ever do so, I'd want to do it with the mod. Are you writing a new book at the moment? That's a secret. Don't worry. If I ever sign a contract or something, I wouldn't be able to tell you guys anyway. For any future books, but I can tell you, I've heard you guys loud and clear. You want a Dark Souls 2 book. You want a Dark Souls 3 book. You want a Bloodborne book. You want an Elden Ring book. And on the last one, I tell you, ask me again another decade. Oh boy. But yeah, all the other stuff, again, when I've wrapped up my analysis of Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, etc., that stuff is totally on the table. Abyssal Archive and Demonic Archive have, I think I can say that they've sold well enough to definitely justify more. My publisher would definitely be, I think, enthusiastic to see me continue publishing under this archive line of books. The Loki ring. Yeah, just ultimately the fact of the matter is, it just takes, you know, I will say this. Not all the content that would be on the for Dark Souls 2 especially is going to be stuff. If there was a book that were to come out, it would not be all the stuff that's on the website. There would be some new stuff there. I wouldn't necessarily say it's like, oh, this is critical, you really need this to understand Dark Souls 2 lore. No, it's a bit more of the ancillary stuff, you know, like side characters and things of that nature, but still stuff where I think you guys would appreciate it. If a hypothetical book were to come out, I'd be like, oh, I'm also covering all this stuff, right? So it's not just the website content, even though obviously that would be the basis. Okay. And that's going to be it, chat. I think we're going to wrap things up here then and call it quits, because I don't know about you, I'm feeling a little hungry. I think I need to make myself some dinner. Plus, I need to go check on this dog and make sure she's not tearing apart the house or something. Oh, God. Yeah, okay, I think looks like that's it right now. So, okay, guys, I want to thank you so much for everything. Again, I want to get special thanks to Smough for making this video, for crediting me for the small role that I played in it. And you know what? I hope we could do it again, Smough. I really want to work with you on this Dark Souls 3 content, because I just really want to get back to Dark Souls 3. You know, I feel like it's an itch I want to scratch. Write a book for every FromSoft game. It's my mission. Yeah, okay, guys. We're going to be wrapping up here. Thank you so much. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.